So this is my page 87, chapter 6. He says, an animus is a spirit, an animating passion, but it's also the will to destroy, yada, yada, yada.
I found it.
Oh, great.
As a reward, you get to be Lindy, Jay.
Thank God. Ransom?
Wild animus, he said.
Oh, there's missing text area too. Okay.
Oh, no.
Really?
That's the title?
An animus is a spirit, an animating passion, but it's also the will to destroy, as in animosity. The characterization of Lindy as a wolf pack still stung her. He could feel her recoil across the line. Wild animus, he repeated. The passion within us that attacks to possess and surrenders for love.
I miss you.
Her voice trailed with self-pity. Ransom took a breath. I miss you too. He could feel their bond unraveling.
You're starving me again.
She said miserably.
I should never have agreed to this. I want to go with you. I'm fit enough.
That wasn't in my copy. You can't quit, he said. The Wrangle trip would be financed by her earnings. Are things any better at work?
Wait. In my version, there's another sentence there. He sighed, feeling the burden she was carrying.
Wow, so my copy is less sympathetic.
I was going to say, so at one point, I bet he went back and was like, let me plug some moments where Ransom feels sympathetic to Lindy.
I guess?
His empathy here is like totally performative, like for the benefit of the
100%,
audience. Like it's
100%.
so disingenuous. Like
Well, it's like
her burden makes him suffer, and that's what we should care about.
Exactly.
A little.
Really? There's a dialogue tag?
Yeah.
Rich, there's no dialogue tag in mine.
I told them why I need the tip money, and the girls understand. Dave's agreed not to put me back on the day shift. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the St. Balasar University English Club podcast. I'm Jay.
And I'm Red.
And we are back again to critique the books that the internet has written off. We have been dealing with quite a few complicated ones recently. I would say we've been on a run of books that have challenged us like none have before. Going back to Rintung and Dorner, I think, was probably the first one where I really started to feel that way. Then we hit like Nova's Playlist and the Noah book, and those were all really tough. And today we are returning back, or maybe he's returning to us, Rich Shapero with Wild Animus.
That's right. The iconic Rich Shapero has given us a figurative mountain to climb with this novel.
Indeed.
A real challenge. So I hope you enjoy embarking on this journey with us.
As with Rintung and Dorner, you could say that inner space mimics outer space, or whatever it was that was on the back of Rintung and Dorner.
Yeah, this like kind of meaningless language that Shapero uses for promotional sort of bits. Like the big one for this novel is a bliss without fear.
Yeah.
Is that it?
He's seeking a bliss beyond fear.
A bliss beyond fear, even more obscure and cryptic.
And redundant, because would it be bliss if there was fear?
All questions that hopefully we will answer today.
And because the questions are so large and so complex, we have called in an assist from my good friend, Andrew. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's me. I'm Andrew. I'm the exchange student from Kelton College. After long, grueling liberal arts studies, I'm here to read books that are very feminist and respectful of other people, and present the world in a kind and wondrous light.
Oh, geez, Red, did you not tell him?
Oh, we must have read the wrong book.
Uh-oh. Andrew, I have some bad news about today's book.
What do you mean? Is this not feminist icon Rich Shapero?
Well, there's women in it.
A shadow of a woman. An imagined woman.
You might say that these women are sort of like the shadow on a cave wall in some kind of allegory. Sort of like someone's idea of what a woman might be if they had only seen a flat projection. I'm
so happy to be joining established character Red and good old Jay in this wonderful podcast I've never been on before. I'm seeing all these wonderful authors. We got Norman Boutin here, Ben Shapero, no relation.
Oh, yeah.
J.A. Johnstone. It's going to be a really hype one. Always love it when we have a third person on to riff on these books.
Yeah, it's always great to have a third person on. And Andrew, I'm so glad to have you. But first, I think, as we always do, we should have Red introduce their expertise inexplicably. Not like anyone needs to know that, since they're the co-host of every episode. But
right.
Since it's tradition, we can have Red reintroduce themselves and re-explain sort of what their whole vibe is.
Hi, listeners who are all very familiar with me. I'm Red. I am finishing a master's in English literature at St. Balasar University currently, and I am a novelist, so I'm going to join the cohort and the MFA in fiction in St. Balasar next fall. I write about illicit economies, particularly drug economies, which makes this book rather compelling to me.
Yes. Perfect.
It's relevant to your interests, you might say.
It's relevant to my interests, yeah. You could certainly say that, so.
The animal rights reading of this is also sort of an avenue with which you're familiar.
Definitely the animal rights, the presence of women, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so.
As we all undoubtedly experience day to day, especially Rich Shapero, clearly very familiar
the presence of women.
Red, thank you for being my dedicated co-host these many episodes. It's always a pleasure to co-host alongside you. Andrew, I'm glad you're here as well, of course. But I think with that, we should be ready to hop right into the summary of this book. How's that sound to you guys?
Perfect.
Well, we got to get through it somehow.
All right, since we've got another whopper of a book ahead of us, we decided we were going to split the summary up yet again. That's been working really well. It lets everybody kind of put their own unique zest on the part of the book that they're responsible for. Red, since you are sort of like my co-host going back many moons,
right.
I feel like it only makes sense for you to kick us off with the first third of the book. So,
wonderful. Okay.
Could you lead us into part 1 of Wild Animus, the prologue, and then also... what is it called? The Ram?
The Ram, yeah.
The
part
Ram,
one.
part 1.
Wonderful. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I noticed immediately that this book has your favorite thing, Jay, which is a prologue.
I love those.
So we'll go ahead and get into the prologue. We open with a rather long, one might say painstaking, description of the Alaskan wilderness, specifically Mount Wrangell. We are in a helicopter flying above a crater. In the helicopter is Lindy Altman. She is a young woman who has a pendant around her neck and also a star-shaped scar on her head. So there's your little mnemonic to remember her. She is crying because there is a man on the ground under the helicopter with blood on his chest. But that's all that we know about that. That's a little hint for you.
We're in medias res, as they say.
Yes, that's right. Many people are saying this. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the first book entitled The Ram. Chapter 1, we cut to the Berkeley campus. This is like a flashback, it seems like, from the prologue.
Mm-hmm.
Here we meet Sam Altman, a, quote, 6-foot statue with shoulder-length hair.
He's a big man.
Who is also described as having, quote, 3-day stubble and green-gray eyes that are sharp and intense.
I forgot that he made himself sexy.
Yeah!
He made himself so sexy.
But like Onision sexy.
It was really giving me Onision vibes, definitely.
Listeners, it's going to be really, really hard to avoid a reading of this book that interprets Sam as a self-insert for Rich Shapero.
Right.
I'm going to try not to allege that as much as I can, but like as we get further on, you'll see why it's so hard not to do.
So, Sam is caught in the midst of an uprising of so-called radicals on campus who are planting trees in a university parking lot. The National Guard is literally here smoke bombing and tear gassing people, but the book really wants you to know that Sam does not care about this.
Mm-hmm. He's like really an enlightened centrist.
He's a Sigma.
He is a Sigma. He's like, I don't care about these eco-radicals, but also the National Guard is part of the man, and that's bad.
Yeah, amorphously. There's a girl there who a guardsman is holding a rifle to. Sam sweeps in, comic book hero style, and gives the guard a, quote, angry look, and the soldier apologizes immediately and lets the girl go. The girl is none other than, surprise, Lindy, from the prologue. He sweeps her away, saving her. Sam later gives her a copy of Alaska Sportsman, a magazine, to write her number on, and there's a white ram with golden horns on the cover. This is going to be a very important...
It's just like in an advertisement. They put so much weight on this, but it's just on a magazine that she picks up.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't sense it from the scene, but this is going to go on to be an enormously important symbol.
Yeah, and the fact that it appears in such an incidental place kind of sets us up for like a cosmology in which there are no coincidences. God is intervening everywhere to direct things in like a particular way. So this is not incidental whatsoever.
It's very chosen one.
Mm-hmm.
It's very fate, destiny. That's the vibe. We're introduced to Josh, Sam's friend. Apparently, Sam very heroically saved Josh and the rest of their expedition trip in the past, even carrying one member who had a broken leg all the way back to safety. They also were revealed to have an affinity for LSD. They trip together. It's worth noting that this is the first in at least 11 LSD trips featured in the novel. I counted.
You counted them?
Yes.
Did you count all the times where it's not mentioned that he took it, but then randomly the text will be like, the drug was kicking in?
Yes,
okay.
I did count that. Anytime that it vaguely mentions that he took something, or it like asserts certainly that he's taken something as a discrete dosage, I count that.
Okay.
I think there's more than 11, though. I was being kind of like, I don't know if it would be generous, but in Chapter 2 of The Ram, Lindy and Sam get high on LSD and they talk about the Ram. They also talk about music and Volt Vogel, Sam's band. This section is the only time that music is mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
It seems like it's going to be a big deal based on the emphasis in these chapters, but then it doesn't come back, so don't worry about it.
That reminded me a lot of kind of in Rintung and Dorner when we get this setup that like Dorner is part of this like heat-worshipping cult or organization, like that his job is more than just like fire guy. There's like a spiritual aspect to it.
Yeah.
And that seems like it's going to be really important, and then it just isn't. The music is kind of like that in this.
That's a great comparison. So, Sam and Lindy go on a walk and both info dump about their traumatic home lives, which also don't matter in the greater plot of the novel at all.
Nope.
Never mentioned, really.
Never.
But what matters is that Lindy was abused.
Mm-hmm.
It's important that we know that. Lindy trips and, literally trips, is falling. And Sam just throws himself to the ground with her instead of catching her. So they're both just lying on the ground next to a sidewalk in someone's yard. Sam picks up a plant nodule, is how it's described, that has fallen onto Lindy and calls it a, quote, molten heart. It sounds pretty gross, actually. The way it's described makes it sound more like some kind of, tumor sort of thing, or like a chewed-up piece of gum is kind of what I was imagining. What's y'all's take on that?
It's all gross. It's all really gross. It's very Rintung and Dorner with the whole, weird words to describe things that are gooey and hot.
Mm-hmm.
Don't like it. Bad. Thumbs down.
The sort of tumorous aspects of it especially sounds like Rintung and Dorner, since the tumor ends up being the main thing in that book.
Yeah, for sure.
We definitely have some repeating motifs here for sure. We're really starting to drill into Shapero, no relation, his interests.
It really seems like he has this nebula of images that he likes to draw from.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth noting that this book came out before Rintung and Dorner, is that right?
I think that's right.
So this predates it by a couple of years at least. So it seems like Rintung and Dorner is maybe an expansion of a particular, image system that he introduced here and then got really, really into later.
He would love that you said nebula.
He would.
So Sam, ominously, out of nowhere, says that he is saying goodbye to everyone he's ever known. And that's basically where the chapter leaves off. So, Chapter 3, we open with Josh and Theo, members of Volt Vogel, who are mad at Sam for the fact that he has been distracted from the band. Josh tells a long story about Sam heroically saving his sister Julia from drowning while they were kids. It's implied that Julia is a huge part of Sam's identity, though she is never mentioned again after Section 1.
Nope.
I don't think.
Nope.
If I'm wrong about that, y'all let me know.
Well, since Andrew got the abridged version, he might
That's
not know.
True. Yeah, that's really strange, actually, that happened.
Yeah, Andrew, is this a good place to talk about that explicitly really quick?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of flabbergasted. You'll find out in our dramatic readings that we just did. I have the Kindle version, which is apparently significantly abridged. Obviously, there's going to be a difference between the form factors of a book and Kindle, but my total pages are at 256 and y'all's were in the 300s. right?
Mine was
Yeah.
316.
316.
Yeah, you have at least 50 less pages than us.
Yeah, and this dramatic reading session was like particularly painful because I just straight up did not have passages that they had. And I don't know if like mine is the pre-released version, but I know that Red has an arc specifically. So that should be a very, very early version. So either he never updated this one or updated it very significantly when he did the digital release.
Very confusing since I have sort of the medium between Andrew's digital and Red's arc, which is just like a normal ass copy,
Yeah.
which matches Red's. So, who knows in what order he made alterations. As far as we could tell, it seemed like it was mostly like flavor text and like
Yes.
dialogue flares and things that were different in Andrew's version. Different as in just not there.
Right.
But I guess it's possible that there are longer sections that are missing as well. We might find that out in the course of this summary, so stay tuned.
So after this, Josh and Theo show up to Sam's cottage and are immediately rude to Lindy. When she answers the door, Theo simply says, "Where is he?" impatiently. It's not implied that these characters have ever met before. Josh and Theo try to score LSD from Sam, then try to pressure both him and Lindy into smoking weed with them. Sam eventually agrees. Something kind of weird happens after this. It's one of the many moments in this text where the dialogue makes you feel like you missed something.
Mm-hmm.
Theo asks Sam if Lindy is living with him, and Sam just nods. Josh then grabs Theo and pulls him towards the door suddenly. Lindy laughs a little. She has like a little cheeky giggle. For some reason. And then Theo reacts pretty disproportionately, saying, "She's fucking laughing. Sam's turning on his friends, bitch." Sam seriously overreacts, punching the ever-loving heck out of Theo, apparently cracking bone, it says. Even though this seems like it would have been an absolutely devastating injury, Theo seems kind of fine. He and Josh and Sam have this little weird verbal altercation, but it doesn't really matter. And then Theo and Josh leave.
Andrew, I had a dream about an alternate timeline where it was you and me recording the Nova's Playlist episode and not me and Red, which it was in reality. And in that dream, you mentioned that you found it very jarring when in Nova's Playlist, like characters would just appear in scenes without ever having them be described as entering.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I was kind of feeling similar here, the way that like it seems like conversations between the guys about Lindy have happened in the background and we just have not heard them or been told that they occurred, because like the level of animosity they have towards her when they just enter Sam's house feels extremely disproportionate.
Yeah, the emotional regulation is completely out of whack. It feels like so much has happened without implication, let alone actual experiencing by the reader. Everyone speaks in such poetic abstractions that it's really hard to get a handle on what their emotional states actually are. The dialogue just across the board definitely needs to be dumbed down.
After this altercation, Julia calls. Remember that this is Sam's sister, though you don't have to remember for very long, because I literally don't think she's ever mentioned again after this. This is the first, 60 pages. Julia calls. This might be the last time she's mentioned. When she asks Sam for help, Sam declares cryptically to Lindy that, quote, "they can see the ram inside of me, and they know what it means."
Mm-hmm.
So, you can let that marinate a little bit. The two of them slip in and out of this bizarre code that orbits imagery of the ram, just kind of ongoing, from this point. After this, they trip again, and there's an insane, disgusting 4-page sex scene.
So, we can just probably breeze past that, right?
Yeah, I don't feel
dwell.
a need to detail that necessarily.
Do you want to break that down point for point?
So, opening in chapter 4, there's a minor time skip. Lindy and Sam have been living together for 4 months. Apparently, they have become totally reclusive and are working on some kind of strange spiritual project. Sam is buying books with shit like shamanic ritual in the title. Josh comes over, and through him, Sam finds out that the cops are onto him for selling LSD. He tells Lindy that he has to drop out of school and flee, and she's basically like, "No problem, I'll come with you."
Yep.
No hesitation. Literally, immediately after this, they run away. Cut to them on this crazy road trip. They end up at Mount Rainier.
Mm-hmm.
Sam learns that the mountain was formed from a volcano and is captivated by the idea of Earth's molten heart. They trip. Sam announces that he wants Lindy to change her name to Lindy Altman, taking his last name, and he wants to change his name to Ransom because he wants to be Surrender's ransom, whatever this means.
Yeah, never explained.
So don't worry about the details on that, because Shapero, no relation, is not worried about it.
If the, like, concerning relationship dynamic wasn't becoming evident before, hopefully it is now. This, like, name-changing stuff is, like, classic, like, isolation and, like, control tactics, both in terms of, like, cults and abusive relationships. But the novel does not ask us to, like, question this at all. It wants us to see Sam as noble and righteous. Ransom now, I guess.
Right. Okay. So now also Sam is Ransom. I hope that's not too confusing.
Ransom
Says that he is a shaman and a ram man, and tells her he has written his first chant. He gives Lindy a necklace with that gross nodule thing from earlier. There is another shorter and potentially grosser sex scene. During sex, Ransom starts chanting about flesh sizzling and muscles twitching. Lindy is down with this, apparently.
Yep.
Notes?
We can talk about the chants later and what that particular word might imply.
I guess that is how music still appears in the story, but it's always like just weird poems. It's not like songs that have musicality.
We then get the first installment of what will become a major component of this book, a bold italics section.
Ugh.
So bold italics sections are these long, multiple page length sort of asides from the text that are in both bold and italics. There's no dialogue in them. It's just very long first-person descriptions, though the rest of the book is in third person. So imagine like a pretty abrupt rift. It's a little jarring. This bold italics section is really hard to make sense of, but essentially it's a really visceral first-person depiction of someone transforming into a ram.
Which is sort of the form that Ransom will be in metaphorically, I guess, during most of these bold italics sections.
Right.
He will also be on acid throughout all of these.
Though it's never really described clearly that the bold italics sections are describing Ransom, it's very clear that they are.
Yeah.
At one point in the novel, it hints that Ransom is writing a book, and the bold italics sections are excerpts from that book. But the bold italics sections always just pick up on where Ransom is with whatever he's doing, so it actually just seems more like a journal or like an autobiographical sort of aside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Worst book ever.
It would be the worst book ever, certainly.
I was going to say I wouldn't read it, but I did read this, so maybe I am fooling myself.
Chapter 5, the last chapter in the section The Ram, there's another time skip. Ransom and Lindy have been living in Seattle for a year. Ransom is rock climbing with a new character, Eric, and Ransom is wearing specially made ram shoes. Ransom sheds protective gear and is climbing with nothing to save him if he falls, causing Eric to yell at him and get really upset. Ransom is also chanting cryptically to himself stuff like huffing, heart-footed, headlong. These little, I don't know.
Alliterative phrases.
Right. Ransom climbs to where his pack is and produces what I can only describe as a fursuit. A full ram getup with 4 hooves, fur covering the full body, and a headdress. So he dons that outfit.
For the furry literate among us, this is sort of like it's like a real suit. Like, it's not like a cartoony one. It's like a very realistic looking.
So it's like a Therian suit.
Yes, it's more like a Therian suit. It doesn't have like a fursuit head, right? Like, it doesn't, like, it covers his head, but I don't think it's like a fursuit head.
I was imagining a fursuit head.
Oh, okay.
It's funnier to imagine it being a fursuit.
It is funnier to imagine it being a fursuit. I was kind of imagining that the headdress was like kind of connected to the cape because of the way that he describes the latches working. And like it's something that he would like fold over your face, and so it would sort of like hang off of your head and still have eye holes, but it wouldn't be like a full helmet.
It does have, just for the listeners' visual experience here, it does have full horns and lots of, like, jewels and that sort of deal. I can only imagine that Shapero, no relation, does own this suit.
It's very intimately described. Yeah.
It is intimately described.
Oh, I didn't think about that at all.
Really? That's all I was thinking about.
I do hate that a lot. Okay, because now that you mention it, there's a part where when he describes how it was assembled, which I think is in this part as well, he mentions that the horns that he got are like from a taxidermist, like they're they were for sale because they weren't anything special, right? They were just
they're like
boring.
regular ram horns.
Normal.
And he was like, but normal is actually what I wanted because it's in like the prime of its youthful vigor or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
And that seems like a detail that you would only know if you went looking for ram horns that were the product of youthful vigor at a taxidermist.
As one does. We've all been there. Okay, there is an abrupt cut to Lindy's job at a restaurant in town. A coworker of hers is selling her LSD capsules, and Lindy tells her that they aren't for her, implying that only Ransom will take them. Lindy gets into her car and she's crying. Back at the house, the whole place has become a sort of project for Ransom's growing obsession with Alaska, rock climbing, and rams. There is a ton of expensive gear everywhere that apparently Lindy has been paying for.
Yep.
Lindy seems distraught at the fact that Ransom is taking such risks during climbs. They get into an argument because Lindy is working 2 dead-end jobs to finance Ransom's dreams, which are not outlined in full detail to the readers, like, ever.
Mm-hmm.
But they're mentioned a lot.
We fully do not know what his goal is.
Yeah, at any point. Her financing of their lifestyle, or his specifically, at least includes all of their bills, his climbing gear and other hobby materials, and huge amounts of LSD for him.
Yes.
Lindy says that she dreams of having a family with Ransom and wants a man who provides, leading to a huge fight. Ransom makes this manipulative move, essentially saying he'll give up his dreams, but Lindy breaks and pulls him back, making him promise to keep pursuing them regardless of her pain. Once again, as Jay pointed out, very toxic, weird relationship dynamics. Every time that she is like, hey, I'm really tired, I'm working really hard to do all this stuff for you, he's like, well, I'll just quit then, I'm just worthless, my dreams are nothing. And she's like, no, don't say that, you are the ram. So
yeah, he's tricking her almost into comforting him, which changes the subject and also gets them talking about the thing that he wants to be talking about as opposed to her concerns.
A week later, they are on a plane to Alaska. They reach the polychrome cliffs and get out to look at the rams, which you may think is a rather charming, bucolic scene, but then Rich Shapero jumps you with another really off-putting sex scene.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle of sex, Ransom notices a male ram staring at them. The text starts referring to him rather grossly as the patriarch. The patriarch could, quote, smell their lust, and Ransom sees an indulgence in his eyes.
Ew.
Ransom stands up butt naked in front of this thing, and they have this little psychic exchange about male power and being a leaper born for high places. The patriarch apparently sees something threatening in Lindy, even though she's just sitting there, and he runs off. Lindy and Ransom debrief later, though Lindy is super supportive of Ransom's weird ram thing.
Mm-hmm.
Ransom says the patriarch had a molten heart. But then things take a super sour turn. Ransom says he is a ram and Lindy is a pack of wolves, and wolves are all death to sheep. This is fully unprompted, and comes out of nowhere. When Lindy is understandably hurt by this, Ransom tries to comfort her by saying the ram cherishes his wound.
That's so gross.
There is a really gross sex scene once again, and in this one, there is even a throwaway line about Lindy trying to squirm away, but Ransom wrestling her back. The text does not encourage us to interrogate this at all.
No.
It is literally like a throwaway. It's like a dialogue tag almost, in terms of its positioning within the scene.
Mm-hmm.
The way that it's incorporated makes it seem like we shouldn't notice it, which is why
Absolutely.
Is it there? Because it's so obviously weird when you start to think about it for even a second.
It's very, in an almost sinister way, just kind of embedded in the sex scene that she is, trying to escape him, and he won't let her. But yeah, again, a very disturbing moment that the text does not take interest in, and it doesn't want us to take interest in it. But I'm taking interest, girl.
Yeah.
I'm taking interest.
I'll pick up that thread in a second here when part 2 kicks off.
Later, a ranger picks them up, and Ransom tells Lindy that he is inspired about a story including rams, wolves, and the molten heart of Mount Wrangell. Ransom says that in order to tell the story, he has to learn more about the wolves, thereby prompting the reader to stare horrified down the barrel of the next section of the book, the wolves.
Oh man, okay. Wow, Red, you always do such a great job with those summaries, but this time I gotta say, you were really thorough. You set up exactly everything that I need to take us the rest of the way. Andrew, how are you holding up?
I'm good. I have what I need.
Okay, so part 2, the wolves. This kicks off where Ransom and Lindy are kind of fully embedded in doing all this research into the Wrangles for Ransom's what now seems to have developed into like a multimedia book project of some kind, eerily echoing the way that all of Rich Shapero's books are both books but have accompanying albums and then like these little like moving graphics if you read them in his app. So they're doing all this research at the University of Washington in Seattle. They're gathering intel about like the ecosystem and the animals that inhabit the Wrangles so that his, I guess, descriptions of the environment can be more accurate. Ransom finally realizes that they've exhausted what's available to them at the University of Washington, so he decides he's going to fly off to Alaska for a while to continue researching at the University of Alaska there. He just does that, and then when the novel picks up, he is somehow suddenly the #1 advisee of a leading expert on wolves in the region. This guy's name is Calvin. Mm-hmm. He is a university professor, and Hal Ransom, a rando 20-something, who is not enrolled at the university, became this guy's like protege, is not explained or examined in any meaningful way. They have this little conversation where Ransom learns wolf hierarchy pseudoscience from this guy who's supposed to be an expert, which is really weird. Ransom asks this extremely loaded question about, like, what is the psychology of wolves when they're hunting? And Calvin says that they experience a state of rapture, that they're gleeful in the act of killing and destroying. So he's like weirdly anthropomorphizing the wolves and like suggesting that they delight in like destruction itself.
I think it's really hilarious that Calvin also says like hunting is like sex for them.
Yeah.
As though wolves don't have sex.
Yeah.
Isn't sex just sex
Isn't
for them?
sex for them?
So won't I may be wrong on this, but won't any wolf scientist tell you that the whole alpha, gamma, beta, omega thing is completely wrong?
Yes, it was debunked by the guy that did the original study.
So I don't understand.
So the fact that this supposed expert just recounts this like known pseudoscience to us and expects us to believe it is very weird and telling, especially in a book that seems to have done a good amount of like animal related research otherwise. We're about to get into a section where Ransom will like identify and name and characterize like 1 billion birds.
Yes.
And many of them are actually native to the region, although I do have a qualm about one bird inaccuracy that I noticed. So it just seemed weird to get this like thing about this fundamental thing about wolves just completely fucking wrong.
Well, could we be charitable and maybe this predates that study being recanted?
Well, let's have a look right now. Why not?
So if this book was published in 2000, was it 4?
This book was 2004.
So when was the wolf thing debunked?
2003.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Yeah, so that would have been like the hot wolf news too.
Yeah.
People in the wolfosphere, would have been talking about it.
He was a wolf denier.
True, maybe it was like the new science and he was like, no, it can't be so. The
like
old ways have been corrupted.
The flat earther of wolves.
Yeah.
He's like a flat wolfer because he's anti-hierarchy.
Flat wolfer.
Okay. So somehow, and the text basically literally says somehow, Palpatine has returned. No, just kidding. Ransom has like leveraged this friendship with Calvin into a month-long trip to the Wrangles, which really upsets Lindy, but we'll get to that in just a second. So the night before he's about to head off, Ransom has dinner with a bunch of professors, each of whom wants him to take notes on a different like subject while he's in the wilds. Mm-hmm. There's one scientist who's a woman. Her name is Catherine. She's an ornithologist, and she gets super, super mad when another one of the scientists criticizes Ransom's admittedly very weird and vague and kind of nonsense plan to go out into the woods and write his book and also collect a bunch of soil and bird and plant samples.
And profoundly dangerous.
Yeah. He's doing this alone, for what it's worth.
With no training.
So she gets really mad when his plan is criticized, and then she equates the challenges that, like, he's facing in pursuit of going to the Wrangles, which is, for what it's worth, none, with the systemic misogyny she has experienced as a woman in STEM. This, around here, is the point where the novel begins using this, like, extended metaphor that compares volcanoes and mountains to, like, armor and medieval fortresses. Mm-hmm. I don't know why this starts here, but at the dinner party, Ransom is like, it is a fort. The mountain is armored. Like, he insists that it's a metaphor, but that it is also, like, in some way spiritually, meaningfully true. And this extended metaphor, at least in my reading, never really coalesces into anything. It also feels very weirdly outside of like this ram-wolf animus trichotomy that we have going on. I don't know, did either of you guys have reads on that?
I had less of a read than you did. I barely picked up on any of the castle stuff. It seemed to be isolated entirely to the wolf scenes.
Well, to me, it's strange because later it becomes like a cathedral or something.
Yes.
Like, he consistently later uses totally separate language that comes from like a different culture, a different time period, a different style of architecture, a different purpose for the building. Like, so that was odd to me. Once again, the book isn't interested in examining that transformation. It just makes that transformation.
Yeah, this book has a very strange relationship to metaphor in that way, where it will make these very contradictory metaphors, but it also will insist that the metaphors are like real. That in some way, Ransom's perceiving of the mountain as a fortress makes it an actual literal fortress in which he can seek shelter from wolves, for example. Ransom has this dinner party, then he calls Lindy one last time before he heads out. Again, their finances at this point rely solely on her waitressing work, which has her like super stressed out. She's despairing. They fight over the phone. Ransom then turns this into like a conversation about him blaming her for not trusting him enough, which then makes her feel defensive, so she begs for his forgiveness, and then that's it.
It's genuinely painful to read.
It's so weird the way that the novel continually frames Ransom as in the right in these situations when he is blatantly abusing and manipulating her.
Yeah.
Then Ransom arranges for some locals to fly him out to the mountains. He meets a whole bunch of side characters, including Skimmer, this like eager, enthusiastic child who in part 3 will kind of become his main disciple.
Yes.
Doug and Ida Hurley, this married couple who are seeking spiritual fulfillment, and some other people, but those are the main ones. Ransom spends a month in the wilderness. He's just dicking around during this time, collecting shit, like I was saying, taking notes for his novel. And because he's just so awesome, he actually discovers some, like, new plant species while he's up there.
Like a ton of them.
Why the hell not? We won't find this out until later when one of the scientists analyzes them, but I'll just go ahead and say now that, like, some of the shit he collects is, like, brand new. And later people will be like, Ransom, you're so cool, you found new plants, amazing. Yeah, so that happens. This is also when we get the debut of his ram fursuit, which he wears as he trips acid and runs around in the woods, thinking very profound thoughts. During this period, this month in the wilds, we also get... Red, don't look at my screen for a second. We also get Ransom's repeated encounters with 7 wolves, who... This set of characters will go on to be one of the novel's overarching metaphors. Each of these wolves, as we have begun to learn, represent an aspect of Lindy. Andrew, Red.
Oh no!
Pop quiz.
No.
Let's see if we can name the 7 wolves and to what aspects of Lindy they correspond. I mapped out this metaphor, so we should be able to complete this chart.
No way.
But I want to see how much you guys could get.
All right, so are we going to take turns or what?
Sure, yeah.
There's the lead.
Yes.
There's the dangler.
Yes.
Hang belly.
Yes.
The rough.
Yes.
The wise.
Yes. 3 more.
Oh.
Dude, there are not 3 more. You're lying to me.
They're absolute. Nope, there's 3 more.
Oh, I thought there was only 2 more.
There's
3 more?
The leaper?
No, wait, there's 2 more. Okay, you guys have got the lead, the dangler, the hang belly, the rough, and the wise. There's 2 more.
Oh no. Is the rough the little one? Isn't there a young one?
They're the younger, Andrew, that's right.
Oh.
There's 1 more.
The
Starts with an S.
skittish. The small.
It is effectively the skittish. The name is the scout.
Oh, I didn't remember
Oh, I
that
don't
one.
remember.
That one barely does anything. Since you guys did such a good job, I'll go ahead and tell you what each of these correspond to, in my best estimation.
Okay.
Some of these show up a lot less than others, so it's kind of hard to tell for sure. But anyway, the lead is like default Lindy. This is the one that just kind of literally leads the group around. They often are positioned in some kind of like triangle in the way that you would imagine a wolf pack to be like cinematically in a movie. That one's in the front. The dangler, this one is a wolf that has very dangly balls, and this is like a representation of Lindy's sexual side for some reason. There's the hang belly. That one represents Lindy's feminine, particularly her like motherly side. Remember that one, because it's about to be important.
It also, like, yeah, you can probably tell from just the name hang belly that it's not a very, I don't know.
It's an ugly one.
It's an ugly one. And her status as a mother is like seen as kind of like heinous and hideous.
Hideous is a great word for it. It's like conflating her desire for motherhood with some kind of like inner ugliness, some like sinfulness. She's like physically scarred, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, then there's the scout, like we said. That's cautious Lindy. The younger represents Lindy's childish side. Interestingly, Lindy's childish side will often be mentioned in the narration when they're having sex, or when Ransom is
really weird.
turned on by her in some way. He'll be like, oh, she's her delightful childish persona or something like that.
And
Very
it's
strange.
like innocence, purity, fragility. These are words that come up so many times.
Very, very weird. The wise is good choices making Lindy. Ransom will often invoke that one whenever she does something that, like, he agrees with without her having to, like, question him first. And then there's the rough, which doesn't matter. I don't know what it corresponds to. It shows up, like, 3 times, so forget about it. Okay, so that's those 7 fellas. For this month period, while Ransom's picking shit up, doing, I don't know, some kind of resource gathering fetch quest, the wolves chase him around a lot. They prevent him from exploring the mountain as he would like. On one of these chases, the hangbelly gets overeager to kill him, gets this fervor to just eliminate him. The novel anthropomorphizes this in such a direct and unambiguous way. Like, this wolf doesn't want to eat him because it's hungry. It wants to kill him because killing him would be enjoyable.
And she's evil.
She's evil.
Described as evil.
So, she gets really eager to kill him and ends up falling off of a cliff during an earthquake and dying, which Ransom interprets as an act of divine intervention. So remember now that, symbolically speaking, Lindy's, feminine, motherly side has just been destroyed by essentially, an act of God, and Ransom's life is saved. When the month is up, Ransom goes to this prearranged rendezvous point to be picked up, which is at a cabin. He meets a racist stereotype of an indigenous man whose wife is dead and he is sad. That's the last I'm going to say about that guy. Andrew, he shows up more in your part, I know, so if you want to talk about him, feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to leave that there. Ransom and Lindy reunite and have dinner with Ida, Doug, and Skimmer. Ida remarks to Lindy that Jesus was a lamb, which to her is just like a ram. Even if the Bible characterizes lambs as good and rams as bad, Ida doesn't really see the difference, and so the implication there is that the novel is equating, in some way, Ransom with a Jesus-like figure.
Hey, they're all ungulates.
You might be thinking, hold on a second, maybe this invocation of evil at all is meant to complicate the symbols in the narrative. Maybe he's Christ-like. Maybe it's meant to make us question whether Ransom is actually divinely ordained, or if, he's ordained by, a dark divinity. That is not the case. He will go on to be likened to Christ in other ways throughout. This is literally here just to foreshadow the development in which Ransom will come to believe he is, as we saw in part 1 even, this quote-unquote ransom that must be paid in order to bring the world closer to God. Mm-hmm. So he's just Jesus. Back in Seattle, Ransom keeps working on his novel. He gets a bunch of letters from the scientists, which is where he learns that some of the plants he discovered are new. Even the people who didn't get, new discoveries out of him write him letters telling him how awesome he is. Ida's letter mentions that because she's been an inattentive wife, it's actually secretly her fault that Doug and her haven't been spiritually fulfilled, and she thanks Ransom for helping her realize her proper role as a nurturing wife. Red, yes? Would you have something to say about this?
I'm raising my hand as though in class right now. It's worth noting that the way that we find out about the letters is that Ransom is upset, and he's having, a little bit of, a temper tantrum, and Lindy is like, oh, honey, do you want me to read the letters to you? Here, sit down, I'll read the letters to you. And she reads all of the letters out loud to him, and it makes it seem like this is sort of a ritual that they have whenever he gets down. She reads all these letters that are like, Ransom, you're the best.
I know, it's like Ransom wants her motherly side to be dead, except for when he wants to be mothered.
Yes!
So, God. One day, Lindy starts a conversation about her dissatisfaction with their relationship and her desire for a family. This echoes a previous conversation, but things are a little bit more intense this time. Ransom once again accuses her of betrayal, likens her to a wolf, longing to have, quote, pups, and then, quote unquote, realizes that he's being terrible to her and launches, into this self-deprecating diatribe so that suddenly she is forced into a position where she has to comfort him. Classic abuse tactic, by the way. Mm-hmm. After this, she lets the topic of family drop, basically forever. He's right back to calling her a wolf, even though he had previously realized that him doing so was, wrong. But whenever she does something he doesn't like, he's going to go on calling her a wolf. So this realization's importance is like completely undercut by the rest of the book. Ransom then trips acid, runs around the neighborhood naked, thinking he's the ram. He gets hurt and is hospitalized. This is where he realizes finally that his god's name that he's been seeking in the mountain is Animus, and he suddenly decides that the wolves aren't actually evil, they're just agents of God sent to test and to guide him, even if that's through violence and like chase. Despite this, yet again, in all subsequent scenes, he will go on acting as though the wolves are evil impediments to his quest. So even though he has realized that they're actually like in this circuitous way doing the Lord's work, he will still act as though they are functionally evil. So this realization kind of means nothing. Ransom finally goes all in on the Jesus allegory. He insists that he has to sacrifice himself to Animus in order to convince people of the spiritual necessity of his belief for all people. If you're wondering what his beliefs actually are, like as in how he thinks people should live their lives or what Animus ultimately wants, you can keep asking that because we will not know. Ransom then quits Lindy's job for her without telling her and relocates them both to Alaska without warning. Begin part 3.
So here's my part. Animus, part 3. Animus opens with another stupid, bold, italics wolf scene. Don't worry about it. It's just purple prose that makes my head hurt. It's something about him coming apart in the presence of Animus or whatever. Anyways, so our heroes, they're in Alaska. And Lindy, of course, continues to bankroll his weird lifestyle. I want to pause here to dwell on the syntax, which normally I'm like the last person to do. But there was one sentence that like had me laughing. It's, Lindy worked waitress jobs while Ransom labored away at his manuscripts and chants. So let's break this sentence down. That's 3 words for what Lindy is doing, 7 for Ransom.
Wow.
And we can talk a lot about how it's so funny to use the term work a job for Lindy's actual labor that she's doing.
Wow.
Whereas we use the term labored away for his hobbies and fursuit. Like that's so naked that like it has to be, I don't know, the narrator or Rich has to be conscious of that. That's comedic.
It is. And like, I think when you were texting us about this earlier, I think you used a phrase like, she's syntactically minimized or something like that,
yes.
Which I thought was a great way of phrasing that.
Syntactically minimized. This is not the only place this happens, but this is probably the funniest place that down to the phrasing of a sentence, Lindy is just going to be completely shoved to the side for no reason.
She's working this, like, silly day job, workaday world, doesn't matter. Oh, but meanwhile, Ransom, his divine labors.
Labor.
So gross.
It's very bad. Ransom decides that he's going to climb Mount Wrangell. They find this guide who's willing to take him up in a bigger group. And not only does Ransom insist on going to the crater rather than the peak or the summit, which is presumably where mountain climbers would want to go. Not only does he insist on doing this, he forces everyone to distribute the weight of his quote-unquote regalia, which is what he calls his fursuit, in their bags.
I think my favorite part of that conversation is when he's like, well, the crater will be the summit next time it erupts.
Yeah.
Your move, atheists.
Yeah.
Right? So completely bizarre insistence there, and it's even worse that, like, you know, he says something like every ounce counts, and Ransom's response is, okay, so distribute my fursuit then, peasants. I don't know. It's very weird. So not only is all of this happening, he forces Lindy, who is not coming on this expedition, to pay for all the provisions. Like, just knowingly, sheepishly looking at her when the tour guide is like, well, guess we just need to pay for the food now. And it's crazy. Lindy has to sell their stereo system to do this. They are living less than hand to mouth. And Ransom just like insists on making Lindy do all these things.
I would like to also point out that the fursuit is stinky.
Yes.
It specifically smells bad. It smells like a ram because it hasn't been washed since it was skinned off of an animal. And by the end of the book, it's also described that the ram suit is like covered in all of this like ash and dirt and dust and all of this stuff. So it is implied pretty heavily that it is never washed throughout the like total of like months that he wears it, running around, bleeding on it, rolling around in the dirt, wrestling with other animals.
It's so deep, you guys. It's being reclaimed by nature. It's becoming part of the molten art. I don't know what you don't get about that. It's like right there.
So easy, right under our nose this whole time. There's another stupid ram section. It continues to play with his desperation to be with Animus. The wolves hunt him some more. There's an open wound on him as well as an open wound on the earth. So there's that little parallel. Did I mention all of these give me a headache because I could not focus on them. It's like they were written in a completely different language.
They're kind of like the way drug trip scenes are written in other media, because like in this book, drug trip scenes are often actually plot significant and like the drug plays an actual narrative role beyond just excuse to make weird things happen. But these bold italic sections are kind of that, where it's just like, here's some weird metaphors for 10 pages. Enjoy.
Right. That does not transform the character, does not add anything. Like, at least dreams are supposed to, like, create a change. We cut to, like, the middle of the expedition up the mountain. Ransom's with a bunch of characters. I'm sorry if these are important characters, but I do not remember any of their names except for Skimmer. Again, Ransom insists on going to the North Crater rather than the summit, and all of the climbers, except for Skimmer and kind of the guide, are just completely annoyed by this. It's kind of funny how the narrative takes this moment to like acknowledge that Ransom's a crazy person. But of course, these people are just impeding his spiritual journey and betraying him. He just completely co-opts this tour. And later, he like saves that kid Skimmer from falling into the ice, and he's like, walk like a ram. And this like is able to save him from the ice, and that kind of galvanizes Skipper's position as Ransom's disciple. He drops on them that he's actually on a mission to commune with the god Animus, which again does not go over well with the tour group. To be fair, I don't know why he thought it would, but whatever. It doesn't really sway anyone. So the rest of the tour group just like leaves him to put on his fursuit and do drugs and hang out. So they keep going and they leave him, basically.
Thank God they do, honestly.
Yeah, truly. We have a time skip that's a little bit jarring, and the others have come back from their expedition without Ransom. The university people are there at base camp to like meet up with Ransom or whatever. They make this huge deal about how Ransom was betrayed with this whole crater versus peak thing. Again, so petty, so weird. Ransom gets flown back with Doug on his little, what do they call it? The pug? The puppy? What's the plane?
What the cub.
The cub, yeah. It's like a red cub.
It's like a red cub. So he gets flown back on the plane. He's wearing full regalia. He trots out and just starts spouting bullshit chants while stomping on an oil drum. Skimmer's kind of into it. There's this girl, Catherine, that we mentioned, who she's kind of awestruck by it. And out of nowhere, Ransom collapses. So it turns out that there is this wound on his chest that was conflated with one of the wolf scenes that he keeps reopening with a willow knife. And he like puts his open wound against the ground to feel God or something really stupid like that. Which, I don't know, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, in a different book, I feel like that symbol could have been really powerful.
Yeah.
In part because the novel keeps, like, creating these parallelisms. So, for instance, between the quote-unquote wound in the earth and the actual literal wound on Ransom. And then it'll insist that the wound in the earth is not just a metaphor. Like, it is a literal wound. And it's very clear about reiterating this to the point where it's hard to read it any other way,
right.
Which I find very strange. We can talk about that more later, but I find it like hard to understand what it means symbolically.
Yeah. There's another bold italic scene. There's an ice cage that opens. There's some more like castle or grandiose imagery. Maybe around this point they start calling it cathedrals, which is very Jordan Peterson pilled, which I thought was kind of funny.
There are cathedrals everywhere for those with eyes to see.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and it talks more about his wound reopening. It doesn't matter. Ransom recovers from his like fever or whatever and has formed this mini cult with these people, which basically just consists of him chanting at them while they sit and have different reactions. You know, some people are on board with it, other people aren't. He just kind of chants. He like denounces the concept of love. He tells a guy whose wife died that, you know, don't worry about love, it just holds you back. He says, don't have children, just live free and wild. And Lindy, who we've established has gone on record wanting children and love, is really hurt by this. And she confronts Ransom about being goat Jesus and cutting himself open. And in classic, I guess, abuser tactics, he freaks out at her and gets her to start crying and apologizing to him. I want to point out here that, like, the word love is always, always, always directly associated with the word surrender, which very, very interesting choice of words there. I get the idea of love being surrender in terms of a like, let go and feel your feelings kind of thing.
Be vulnerable with another person who you trust.
Right, but that is absolutely not what the narrator means. And it's very obvious that that's not what the narrator means.
Yeah, it means
very
like
disturbing.
Give yourself up to the power of another force. Like become supplicant to something.
Right. And then there was a part in Jay's section where Ransom says that love is death's sister, which, oh my god, the implications of that, you know. I don't understand why he's so anti-breeder and anti-love, other than the fact that it, like, impedes his ability to climb mountains and wear his fursuit. It's weird.
Yeah, and like on one hand, I feel like that's just a riff on that like saying about how the French word for orgasm means little death or whatever. So it's like on one hand, not a very original thought, but like in the context of this book, it's extra disturbing.
Yeah.
Because it seems like his real craving is for some kind of like self-annihilation. And because he thinks everybody else should be following his religion too, the implication is that like everyone should crave like destruction, not just death, but like total like dissolution into Animus.
Yeah.
And that anyone who doesn't crave that and or wants to prevent him from achieving that is a villain. Like when you were talking about how on the hike people quote unquote betray him for not wanting to go to the crater, like it's really emblematic of the way that nobody in this book can ever just disagree with Ransom. They have to be betraying him. There can never just be a minor squabble. The stakes always immediately escalate to the highest possible degree, and it makes you feel like you're kind of in a wacko world a little bit reading it.
Wacko world is kind of the best way to describe it. I didn't even think about the Le Petit Mort thing, mostly because, like, not to be too grotesque, but, like, I always took Le Petit Mort to be, like, a reference to how it feels, not, like, literally a death in any sort of way.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe this is some misinterpretation on mine and or Rich's part. But
no, that makes me wonder, because that's kind of what I always thought too.
Not that you're subsumed and supplicant to a pack of wolves now because you've known a woman carnally. I don't know.
I think it is a misreading on Rich's part. I think that he thinks that it's a bliss beyond fear, you might say, as opposed to just like a sort of like calm or peace.
Yeah. So we must continue up this mountain. Seeing how upset Lindy is by all of this, Ransom's solution is to force her to move to this remote base camp and find a new job in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, while he lives in this cabin in the tundra full time. And he's like, but don't worry, Lindy, you're still my number one. Here, you can schlep around in a rickety, dangerous-ass plane every weekend to visit me in this remote environment where you will not know whether I am alive until you land and hear the sound of the generator.
For those keeping track, the progressive like isolation of Lindy at this point has kind of reached its terminus. Like she started out as like kind of vulnerable, not having many named friends or family. He moves her to Seattle. He then moves her to rural Alaska. Now he's moved her to ruraler Alaska, where they are alone in a cabin.
Yeah. So rather than continuing to have this discussion, they just have sex about it, and the matter is settled. This one isn't as gross, though, so I guess, silver lining. After a time skip, they have their final depart, and there's this really tragic exchange. Again, I'm kind of hung up on the syntax here. So Ransom's about to leave. Lindy says, "Think of me." And Ransom's response is just the word Friday. And I was kind of hung up on this exchange. I don't know about you guys or whether this segment was even in your copies, but does he mean I will see you Friday or I will think of you Friday? Because, I don't know, that's very concerning options. Like, does he just completely forget that Lindy exists for 5 days out of the week? And if so, why even have her around other than to bankroll his lifestyle? It was very dark and tragic to me to read that.
It's just a horrible thing to say to someone. Either way, it's terrible.
Oh, sure, yeah. It's like not good either way, but if it's like, I will think of you Friday, that's a whole other level to me. A month passes. It's the 4th time Lindy is visited. They don't know whether he's alive until they hear the generator after landing. That's so crazy to me. But anyways, Ransom spends pretty much his entire life recording his chants, climbing the mountain completely alone with no gear whatsoever, just trusting Animus to protect him, which I guess is working because he's still alive, but I digress. The wound on his chest is getting progressively worse because he keeps reopening it, and Ransom's body is like scored up from wearing the animal costume at all times. He just lives in it, and this affects his body adversely.
It's so gross. I have to insert how hilarious it is that the book wants us to believe that a regular man in a fursuit is single-handedly running away from a pack of 7 savage wolves. And okay, I have to know, Andrew, Jay, are y'all imagining that Ransom is on all fours?
Yes.
Or on
Yes.
2 legs when he's
Of course.
running? I was imagining all fours too. So a regular man in a fursuit, in all fours,
Yep.
running full speed in the Alaskan wilderness, escaping 7 hungry wolves consistently over and over again for a period of months.
Yeah,
Not just hungry, like,
they want to kill him.
they want to kill him.
I forgot they're
Yeah.
evil.
They're evil. Like,
Right.
they are spiritually designed, created, destined to destroy.
Yep.
That is their purpose. And he outruns them,
He
which is
outruns
even
them.
more crazy.
I need a film adaptation now.
Yeah, where he's just in like a normal stereotypical fursuit, like a cartoon.
Sinking in the snow immediately, like up to the elbows.
I was imagining like a CGI ram, like for those scenes, he like bends down on all fours and then like slowly like transforms.
style?
Yeah, anamorphs into. Yeah.
Have you ever seen that thing? It's like a GIF or like it's from some show of 2 guys in like one of those like horse costumes, but it's a zebra, and he like goes through the savannah and like right in front of lions and they like paw at him. You know what I'm talking
I have
about?
no idea.
I'll have to send it to y'all or superimpose it on the video or something because it's so funny. It's exactly what I was thinking of here. Anyways.
Just have that playing on loop for the YouTube upload of this.
Yeah. So Ransom's completely delirious, I guess, from a combination of all the drugs he's taking, the open wound, the isolation. He keeps mumbling about all the wolves as Lindy's trying to clean his wound. And Lindy, like, convinces him to come back with her to civilization for just a few days, but only if she commits to climbing the mountain with him. There's more boring wolf stuff. There's actually some interesting duality with how the blood from the open wound that Animus wants is also what draws the wolves. I thought that was neat in a way, but I don't like these segments at all. Lindy and Ransom end up having a good weekend in the mountains. They make a pie, they go on strolls. It's all very idyllic. And then they come back as planned to this big party full of all the other characters to show off what he's been working on. When asked to tell all the people about himself and Wild Animus, which is the book that he's been working on, he proceeds to just chant at them, which is so awkward and acknowledged in the text to be so awkward. And like no one knows what to do. They're just kind of watching him, other than his disciples, which include Skimmer and Catherine, who out of nowhere, Catherine says that she's in love with him. This is completely forgotten about. Lindy doesn't even react to this that much.
It's such a weird and gross section. Like, it's worth mentioning, too, that this other kind of nothing character, Vince, spends the whole party, like, looking down Catherine's blouse and, like, flirting with her and being
Yes.
really gross and weird. And then Catherine declares her love for Ransom out of nowhere. So she's really just here to be like, kind of
ogled.
Yeah, it's rather odd. It also, hers I think is the only outfit that is described in this scene.
Yes.
Because she's wearing like a short skirt and like a busty blouse.
Yes.
And like it's described in super vivid detail when no one else is described at all, really, their physicality.
Right.
How do you do that as a writer? Like someone who clearly knows how to write a thing, I don't know how you do that and don't notice it. Which makes me think he knows what he's doing and just doesn't care.
I know.
Or thinks it's justified in some way.
It's so hard to think that it would be subconscious because it seems like he would notice at least that a character is so disproportionately represented in that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's like what you were saying, Andrew, like the syntax itself. It's like when the women characters are present in the novel, so many of the words used to describe them are sexualizing or showing that some man has like a power over them. Because within that scene, the power over Catherine essentially transfers from Vince to Ransom.
Yes.
But like Catherine doesn't really have like agency. It's really odd.
It's very odd.
That lack of agency is something I want to talk about later in terms of like how the cosmology of this novel itself like prevents agency for anybody other than Ransom. I just wanted to earmark that because I think it's really interesting that we came to such similar conclusions.
Yeah. So somehow, and I'm ready for me to have missed something on this. Maybe it was also omitted from my copy. It seems like it's out of nowhere, but Ransom realizes, or surmises at least, that all this party is a ploy by Lindy to get him to think that he achieved his goals already so that he doesn't go back out to the mountains, and that this is some trap to stop his great mission.
Fucking paranoia.
Yeah. Like, was there more context than am I being uncharitable from your guys' perspective? No? Okay,
That's
good.
exactly what happens. He turns on everyone and like freaks out.
Yes, it turns on everyone, freaks out. Again, Lindy starts sobbing.
It's awful.
It's so unhealthy. She's apologizing to him. She's like, it's true. That's why I did it. And he calls her love a way station. And that word choice there is telling.
Genuinely chilling to read.
In the next chapter, though, apparently all that gets resolved because Lindy and Ransom are touching down at the cabin in the middle of nowhere, and Doug the pilot asks, only after they land, I might add, what they're doing up there.
So, what's this about?
Yeah, like after the boots are on the ground, and he's like, hey, are you guys going to climb this mountain alone with no help or protection whatsoever? And they're like, yeah. And then he's mad. I'm like, you didn't think to ask what you wanted to do up there before? Anyway, nitpick. But Ransom and Lindy, they make camp, and he does some weird blood ritual, like from one of his wolf dreams. The wolves appear, but they don't attack because it's not time in some weird cosmic way. I don't know. Lindy actually starts to go crazy and buy into this, I guess from a combination of drugs and the elements. She starts to like feel the presence of Animus or whatever. From now on, she'll vacillate between being completely on board believing in Animus to Animus is not real, you're an insane person, kind of as the narrative requires.
At which point she is a wolf.
Right. At which point she is a wolf. There's more wolf boltalics. Some wolves die in an avalanche. I guess this mirrors Lindy's conversion, temporary as it is. Their bacchanal is cut short by a storm, which would force any rational person to turn back as the wind gets crazier and crazier. But Ransom is like, we gotta go to this crater, dude. I've already let go of the opportunity one time with the tour group. We gotta go. Lindy's like, hey, maybe we should go get our tents and our packs and get out of here. But Ransom just like won't hear it. They're both disoriented. The prose gets really, really purple and opaque here. And there's this sad, sad exchange where Lindy just like looks at him and she's like, I wish we weren't high.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it kind of dumped upon me how absolutely terrifying and sad and scary that this position is. And I could have almost cried. I was so like struck.
The novel became Requiem for a Dream for 1 millisecond, and then it went back to weird Ram LSD Alaska vacation.
Yes. And throughout all of this, despite everything that happens to Lindy, the novel consistently without almost any hiccups, frames Ransom as doing, like, the literal work of God. Like,
Yes.
This is a moral, spiritual necessity for the sake of the entire world. He can never be wrong, no matter who he's hurting or how much. It is wild to me.
Ransom is fully ready to abandon Lindy here. He, like, deliberates with himself whether that's what Animus wants, whether this is, like, a challenge from him. He changes his mind at, like, the last second, and then he says, let's go get our packs and get out of here, which, that's what Lindy said to do 5 minutes ago, but no, you had to come to terms with it on your own before deciding that you've made this executive decision out of nowhere, which I thought was comedic in its sadness.
It's telling.
Yeah. So Lindy's had it at this point. The storm clears. They're back in safety, and Ransom is, like, pretty much convinced at this point that this was just a test from Animus to prove that he can let go of Lindy if he needs to. And Lindy just flies away with Doug, leaving Ransom to quote unquote cross the threshold alone. It's very important that he does this mission alone or whatever. So a bigger storm hits. Our characters look on as Ransom is definitely dead, and a collection of the characters that we barely know sit around and say, wow, death will be a triumph for him. And that is the end of our prose. We close out on this book with another wolf segment. The symbolic representations of our deeply unhealthy characters enter a grotesque union. Here it is the ram being devoured by the wolves, and then the entire world is burned alive, which here is a volcano erupting. Astute listeners will notice that this is kind of, from a makeup perspective, the exact same ending as Rentung and Dorner. So,
same plot beats, same vehicle of destruction, just different, like, parts of the metaphor. So, like, it's the world's blowing up, but this time it's a volcano erupting instead of a bunch of meteors blowing up the city.
I think what literally happens if you shed all of the weird cosmology shit and, like, the, like, destiny stuff and all of that, and, like, take away all the metaphors, is that guy high on LSD dons fursuit and jumps into volcano.
Yes, I think that is exactly what
just to make that clear. And you know what confuses me actually about the ending and why I find it unsatisfactory personally is that the wolves follow him. Like, the wolves come into the volcano with him because they, like, chase him towards death, I guess. Like, they'll chase him to the very end, and so they all jump in. But, like, the whole novel has set this precedent that Lindy is the wolves, and Lindy does not come with him to the volcano. She leaves.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't make sense that the wolves are there in the volcano with him, because it completely shatters this precedent that Lindy is the wolves and makes you look back at the entire rest of the novel and think, like, did that even mean anything?
I think this ties into what I was kind of trying to express earlier, where, like, metaphors in the novel stop becoming metaphors and, like, become literally true.
Yeah.
Because this is, like, a total disruption of that pattern, because, yeah, like, the novel frames Ransom's perception of reality as objectively correct. In his perception of reality, the wolves are not just metaphorically Lindy, they are Lindy. So for her not to be there feels like a plot hole. Like, I don't know what else to call it. It's a contradiction.
Crater even. A plot crater.
Yeah, a rupture in the flesh of the narrative.
A nodule.
A tumor eating the story from within. So, that was the book, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. I'm gonna go take a shower.
I know!
Yeah, for real. I'm actually unironically getting very hot.
Yeah, genuinely. The room is, like, heating up. Our books are glowing.
Oh, yeah. As we discuss it, they get warmer.
Yeah, they're hot to the touch.
I think it's feeding on our attention.
I smell the burning flesh.
Is this the Molten Heart calling to us?
I think it is.
I must go.
Molten Heart is calling, and I must go. All right, great summary, guys. With that, why don't we hop on over into some of the things, I know, that we liked about this book.
Oh, boy.
It was a fantasy from his childhood, in the bathroom with a girl, and the adults didn't know. He drew the towels away. Through the resolving blur, he saw hair divided in the middle of her crown, a pyramid of high forehead, and cheeks bounded by sickle-shaped locks that pricked her chin. Her eyes were blue, fixed on him with the gravest stare he'd ever seen. He waited for her to bow her head, to turn, to laugh, but she didn't flinch. What made those great gulfs of eyes, and how could she invite a stranger to fathom them? Sam gazed deeper, imagining he saw the bottoms of rugged canyons in her eyes, the dark foundation of a different world.
Things that I liked about this book, I mentioned in my little intro, since, yes, secretly I am actually the guest on the episode and not the permanent co-host.
No, the veneer is falling away. The bit, it's collapsing before my very eyes.
So, as I mentioned in my introduction, I study illicit economies, which is pretty much any kind of money-making that has, like, legal limits on it or is illegal in some capacity.
I want to highlight that that's a neologism that you coined, right?
Yes, that's true.
So I feel like it's worth noting that that's like your cool phrase.
Oh, thanks. I thought you were being like, hey guys, if you don't know what the hell Red is talking about right now, it's not your fault.
No, I just mean like it's an academic sort of sounding phrase, and it's also one that like you invented, so I feel like you should get props for that because it's cool and it's efficient.
You. So think about illicit economies with a little TM at the top, patent pending. So I write and think about drugs a lot and the way that they are discussed and the way that they are represented in media. And I actually don't have a huge problem with some of the LSD in this book.
Really?
I do think that, and not to get into things that I don't like, I think that potentially Shapero, no relation, himself, he bleeds through a lot in the text. And it does seem like he personally believes, perhaps, and this is speculation, but the LSD is like a route to learn things about the universe or to have the universe reveal things unto you that would be impossible to grasp otherwise. And I think that is misinformation. The novel doesn't dwell on it very much though, which I think is great. And Jay alluded to this a little bit earlier, but Ransom seems to be on acid almost the entire time in the book, but it's actually not very obtrusive at all to the reading. It's treated as just sort of like a background thing, and the text doesn't get too like weird and experimental outside of the gigantic bold italic sections. But it's not trying to portray like a drug trip and like a very overbearing or like novelizing or I guess like fetishizing way at all. It's just sort of like a background feature that changes, it seems like, Ransom's perception of the world, but not necessarily the storytelling too much all the time, which I appreciate.
To highlight the sort of like common drug-related foibles that the text is not making, if you've seen a movie like Infinity Pool, there's a lot of
oh my gosh,
there's a lot of drug trips in that where the drug trip is used for, I would say, two main purposes. One is to have an excuse to have a lot of like crazy shit happen with weird camera angles and like visuals that are like, whoa, drugs. The other reason is to like obfuscate information so that there can be plot twists later.
Yes, it comes across as rather lazy.
Yeah, it's like an excuse to hide things from the reader. In this book, that is not the case. The drug trips are just woven directly into the narrative in a way that I found pretty refreshing.
So I want to ask you guys as the experts, how much LSD do you think Rich Shapero has done?
I don't know, because like a tab, so like if you're talking about dosage of individual tabs or like overall, definitely overall, I think a lot.
You think a lot?
Because like you're saying, Red, he seems to bleed through here, and I think that like his perception of reality has been permanently altered by the amount of acid that he has done in ways that enable him to write in a very particular way, but also in ways that I think have potentially like unhitched his mind from observable material existence. That said, in terms of like how much does he do, like dosage, I don't know, because like a tab is kind of a meaningless metric because like a tab can have different amounts of acid in it, and usually he'll be like, I did a quarter tab, I did a half tab, and it's like, all right,
it's just like an Advil. It might have a totally different milligram amount.
Yeah. To me, from my uneducated perspective, it struck me at like that one Tumblr post about Grimes where it characterizes them as someone who had done acid the wrong way, and instead of humbling you, it what did it say? It underscores your pre-existing beliefs that you're the most special little thing in the universe.
Dude, literally.
I almost would have thought that Rich had like done it once on a camping trip one time and never again, but I see what
hilarious.
You guys are saying. I see what you guys are saying.
That's hilarious. I would say no matter what the truth is, you know, Rich Shapero is a venture capitalist who has an insane amount of media around him that he has made. He has like a huge website that has a ton of like clickable links and interactable with, I don't know how to say that, things. And the books themselves are multimedia, as y'all have talked about. And he definitely coins himself as a very psychedelic author and person.
Yes.
So I would imagine LSD is a huge part of his life just because it shows up in his visuals, it shows up in his titles, it shows up in the actual plots of the book. Like, but either way, whether he does a lot of acid or doesn't, he wants you to think that he is like a totally tripped out, like, cool dude.
Like a mystic.
Yeah, like a shaman ram man.
Yeah, it's like a marketing tool as much as it is real or not.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? It gives him a strong brand. I mean, love it or hate it, I guess.
Yeah.
In the hands of a different person, I think it could be a potentially very interesting brand. Well, one thing that I liked is Rich Shapero is good at... He does this in the wrong place a lot of the time, but he's good at breezing past sort of like establishing information that other books, especially books by like novice writers, might get bogged down in. Like, especially when I was first starting to write fiction, I felt like I was always nervous that like if I didn't spell a lot of like basic things out, like how characters got from place to place, or how they obtained a certain like semi-consequential object, that people would be like, that's a plot hole.
Yes.
But in Rich Shapero's book, he's good at just sort of like breezing past that and just kind of like giving you that information and then moving on. Again, he does it in places where like more pausing and dwelling would be very beneficial, I think, to comprehension. But for instance, there's this one moment where I have to reread why I marked this part. Oh, yeah. Okay. So there's this one moment where he's talking about how he assembled and got the pieces to assemble the ram suit. And in a single paragraph, he just kind of outlines all the different places that he went to get the pieces and like the experts that he worked with. And it was very efficiently told. And I was like, good. Okay. We're just moving on past all of this logistics shit. That said, because the ram suit is so important, I wish that we had kind of gotten more information about the contributors to its creation, because it seems like that could potentially have a lot of symbolic weight. But Rich definitely doesn't want us to think of it that way, and the novel is good at getting us to not think of it as a collaborative project between other people. It is solely his thing that some randos helped him make.
It is interesting to me that, like, there is not an interest in the ram that the suit is made out of. Because, like, rams and the death of rams and the suffering of rams and the torturing of rams and the hunting of rams and, like, all of this stuff is huge to Ransom. It is huge to him, literally worth giving his life up for. But his suit is made out of a dead ram. And so the killing of that ram, you would imagine, is something that he would have some sort of relationship with, be it positive or negative. And it just seems totally, I don't know, unexplored. Which is odd. I don't know. I guess it's not even really a critique, honestly. I'm just sort of like baffled by that.
I'm doubly baffled by it because, as we learn, the horns actually come from a separate ram.
Right.
Yes.
And it specifies that horns are illegal to buy or sell, but he found an abandoned pair at a Portland taxidermist. So this one we know was poached illegally.
Yes.
But again, the novel takes no interest in that creature's death. There's no empathy for it. It is literally an object that serves Ransom's ends.
Yeah, it seems totally counterintuitive from the way that, like, the novel tells us Ransom feels about these animals.
Yeah, it's like, are rams actually spiritually important, or is just Ransom spiritually important, and he happens to like rams?
Totally.
It's that one ram, the patriarch, that's important. All the other rams are kind of inconsequential.
That was so gross for so many reasons.
I'm happy it didn't come back up.
Me too.
The prose can be good sometimes. It's kind of like the exposition thing. Rich has written books before. Again, there are a couple authors that we have in this club where that's not the case, very, very blatantly. So there are times when I enjoyed the imagery. I think the prologue actually had some good tundra imagery, or maybe I just remember the prologue fondly because it was before I got bogged down in everything.
It was pre-patriarch and post-patriarch.
Okay, wait. I want to go to bat for the patriarch. That scene, I remember being pretty harrowing. I got caught up in, I almost said Rich, Ransom's feelings for this ram, and I realized that it was, not that great. But I could feel that this was a very spiritual moment, and I felt something within me stirred.
I think for me, the reason it doesn't land is because Ransom purports to know what the animal is feeling, but he actually doesn't. Like, it's all completely projection. So anytime that he claims that he is connecting on some deeper level with any animal, really, all he's doing is feeling his own feelings and then kind of like appropriating the animal's experience and claiming it as his own, if that makes sense. Red, am I explaining that okay?
It's kind of also what he does with the other human characters as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, he purports to sort of know, I don't know, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and I don't know if it's supposed to make us feel that he just has this huge bleeding heart or whatever, but it just comes across as him assuming that he knows the world better than he does.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's part of it, but the emotional state, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is.
Yeah. It made you feel
Maybe
something. That's good, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe something just broke in me for a couple seconds.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that it's like effectively executed, even if the thing that it's trying to execute is kind of atrocious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I mean, I think that leads into another good thing, which is that, I mean, Rich is a very skilled writer.
Mm-hmm.
Rich Shapero has written like 1 billion books. Listeners, you should really check out his website if they haven't. He has a novel called Island Fruit Remedy, which sounds like a delicious smoothie. Indeed, it is a novel.
Or it sounds like a flavor of like weed gummy you would get at a smoke shop.
Yes, totally. And then buy LSD from the guy like behind the smoke shop later that day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he has an incredibly impressive vocabulary, sometimes a bit too impressive, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he definitely likes all the bells and whistles. He likes all the floral language. And this is the kind of thing that an editor should help you reel in, because there are moments where it's just impossible to even tell what's going on, because things are so overly decorated. But at times, I mean, it really works, and he has some really beautiful moments, even just on the sentence level. So he's definitely a skilled writer. He knows how to make a book look really good, too. The formatting is perfect. I've seen, Big Five novels published with more typos than this one.
Sure.
It's clearly a novel that has been really pored over.
On that note, open call to anybody that has ever written in collaboration with or around or taught Rich Shapero.
Please.
Clearly he has worked with people in some kind of workshop format maybe, or as with a private tutor. If you're that person, please talk to us.
Please, I would love that.
I would love to know what you know about this man. Truly fascinating stuff, I'm sure. One thing that's a little smaller that I really liked was this moment at the end of the first chapter where Sam, so Ransom, pre-Ransom, and Josh are talking about like their friendship, and they're both like 20 and they're concerned that like their life is about to go through a bunch of changes and that they might not still be friends. And the way that scene was executed was a bit heavy-handed, but ultimately I think conveyed like, oh shit, they both realize that their friendship is in the toilet or about to be, and neither of them can admit it to themselves or to each other, and that's like really sad. That sucks.
Sure.
Of course, I feel worse for Josh than for Sam, and maybe even glad that Josh got away from Sam. But like in terms of this scene exists to convey that something bad is about to happen, and it does do that. So, check mark there.
Yeah, there's almost a tender moment between these two people too, where like their friendship, it's really wholesome. And honestly, for a man who is so egregious in his portrayal of women and his beliefs about male power and male domination, it honestly is a nice moment between two men who seem to have at least previously maybe had a healthy friendship, and like they truly really love each other, and that's nice. And you know what? I hope that means that Shapero himself has something like that in his life.
Yeah,
one can hope.
I think he could use a friend.
Could use a friend as well.
Kind of like with Tongue, I really could feel with Animus that we were dealing with some non-human, half-real entity. The way that Rich was able to sell this concept to me, I thought was really effective. Again, the word choices used around Animus, kind of like with Tongue's dialogue, use his weird vocabulary to his advantage, to where I'm like, okay, maybe this spirit does exist. Maybe this is the nature god. I could buy it in the narrative universe here.
This is unambiguously a critique, and it's not even really a critique of the novel so much as like a personal bugaboo. But like, I was really bummed out that after all of this stuff happening, the god that we arrive at in this novel is basically just like god of nature. That's also kind of Christian a little bit. I was like, really? After all of this, we've just come back around to like kind of a hippie drug love nature god. Like, it can't be any more interesting than that.
I don't mean to be a negative Nelly, Jay, but what were you expecting?
I don't know. At least Tongue had flair.
Yeah.
The flare of the tongue.
I have to pull out something, which is that I have a degree in religious studies from Willow College.
The one and only.
The one and only Willow College. So I have a storied history with Rich Shapero, as you will know if you listened to the Rentung Adorner episode. But I agree that this is unambiguously a critique as well. But it is such like a pity to me, it's such a peeve to me when people write books or make movies or whatever it is where they want to like create their own god or their own religious framework, but these people obviously come from like a Western Christian framework and they just recreate Christianity in some other kind of way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I get to be Jesus this time.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, Sam Ransom even sneers at Christian characters at one point in the book. Like, he really turns his nose up at them in a way that's like, oh, you stupid people with your stupid fake religion. Animus is the real god kind of deal. It rubs me the wrong way in the same way that, like, the overuse of acid trips to create, like, psychedelic effect and to withhold information from readers, that sort of thing. It just feels like, it feels a little lazy.
And to speak to that Christian point a little more, Ida and Doug are Christian, and every time that they mention being Christian, they feel the need, Ida especially, to apologize to Ransom. They're like, we know you're not Christian, and we're sorry that, like, we don't get along in that way, but, like, we kind of worship the same thing if you think about it. And it's like, why do you feel like you have to supplicate yourself to him? Like, you just don't believe the same thing.
He's just some guy.
Yeah. But his power, it's just so magnetic.
Oh,
like,
I suppose.
They feel the urge to, I don't know, apologize to him.
That's kind of a thing, right? Like Christian guilt or whatever. I could see, like, you know, you meet like a Buddhist and you're an evangelical Christian who's like sort of liberal and you keep apologizing for being Christian. I could see it.
I could make sense of it in that way, I think.
But yeah, no, it's just kind of weird when it's about Ram God.
I think that the last thing that I had marked to talk about that I liked about the book is in the wild Animus party at the end of the novel is so bizarre. It's very Flannery O'Connor to me, honestly, in the way that it almost feels like it's mocking itself. And again, I don't know how much of this, like, Rich Shapero meant to come across in this way, but, like, for example, they bake him a cake and write wild Animus on it. So they make him a wild Animus cake, and then they all stand around watching him do his chants, and even though it's kind of uncomfortable, everyone is still sort of like, yay!
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I want to hope that, like, Rich Shapero has some sense of, like, irony and humor about this, because that scene was genuinely enjoyable to me. The cake really was, like, the cherry on top to me. I think it's hilarious. I think it's sincerely very funny. I don't really know what to make of it in the context of the larger novel. I don't know if we're just supposed to feel humiliated for Ransom, or if we're supposed to think that the novel is, like, for a moment taking off its, like, insane, sort of, like, false academic cloak and just becoming, like, a little silly for a minute. It was enjoyable to read.
Yeah, it makes the party seem like a little bit childish in a way that does feel like a little bit, like, self-awarely self-deprecating or, like, mocking. But there's always that question of, like, is it being silly, or is this all just set up so that it can reveal that really Lindy was betraying him all along and this is all a trick?
Oh no, now you're making me think that's what it was.
I don't know. Well, I want to be wrong, but I feel like it's an option. I
liked reading it anyway. It reminded me of this, like, Church Without Christ in Wise Blood.
Yeah.
It's just, like, so funny. But, yeah, I don't know if Shapero is an O'Connor.
I think we're being uncharitable to him. In the structure of the book, we have the prologue of Ransom dead on the ground with blood everywhere, you know, that this is a pitiful situation that he ends up in. I don't remember there being anything framing the prologue as, oh, this great sacrifice. We have all of these moments where we're like, oh, is the narrator and or Rich conscious about the implications of some of these things? Like, does he realize how awful Ransom is to Lindy? Does he realize how awkward that party scene is? And I think the answer is yes.
You think the novel wants us to be critical of Ransom?
It wants us to be more critical of Ransom than we might believe at first glance. And it's really just because of the prologue being there and it putting up front unambiguously, this man will die in a crater and not be able to be saved. Having that as the nidus of all of this, and then they get into this horrible relationship, and then they have all these weird moments with like, is the god real? Is the god not?
I don't know though, because like the last time we hear the characters speak, if we're talking about the order that things are presented in the book, we have Ida say this line that's like, death will be a triumph for him, and then we have this extended scene where like he dies and melds with the world, and like enraptured is fulfilled by this like self-dissolution. And so like maybe in the prologue for Lindy it's a tragedy, but like again she's been like abused into pitying him at this point, I think.
Oh, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There are moments for Lindy where the mask slips,
mm-hmm.
and this is actually kind of a positive thing too, but like the mask slips in moments with Lindy, and she looks at Ransom and sees like someone crazed, like
mm-hmm.
out of his mind. He's lost it. And she is like genuinely fearful for him and is like, he's gonna die, you know, and there's like a real fear there. And that's honestly, I think, a good thing. It adds a little bit more urgency to the text. It adds like a level of suspense.
Mm-hmm.
It deepens their relationship in some ways. But then I don't know how seriously the text actually takes it though, because there are moments where then Ransom will see that fear in her and kind of just dash it and just insult it and like bat it to the side. And at moments like the text almost feels to like relish this dismissal of Lindy and even other characters' concern for him. Like it's almost, at times to me it feels like the text is like gloating about Sam being indifferent to people's concern for him. Like how many kind and worried things can they say to him for him just to like, you know, spit on it all.
Yeah, and reestablish a dominance hierarchy in which he is always at the pinnacle alongside Animus.
Is that wanton cruelty or just really, really mishandled dark comedy? Like the points that I called out in my summary, the Lindy says, let's go get the pack, and then Ransom just doesn't want to hear it, and then later on he says, let's go get the packs. That's not like a comedic scene. That is comedy. That's something out of a sitcom. But the problem is everything's so mean-spirited that I just think, I don't know, like it drives me crazy trying to figure out like what was intentional and what wasn't here.
I know, and I think that unless y'all have more positive things to say, that could kind of lead us to critiques, because I do think that is a big criticism.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to say that's positive.
7 of them, tense with excitement, their faces looming across the pool in a gloating arc. On the left, a large wolf bobbed its blunt muzzle, huffing and craning toward him, its curious features surrounded by a fanning gray ruff. The fur of the wolf's underside was spiked with water, and his male genitals were dripping.
Ew.
Beside the ruff were the pair with lanky legs, wowing to each other, the tail of one draped over the other's back. Their odor was female, and they studied him, one knowingly, eyes looking up from her downturned head. I'm looking at the back of the book now because I'm thinking that could potentially be a useful framing device to understanding, is this meant to be a comedy or is this meant to be straight-faced?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the answer is like kind of complicated but also clarified by this. So part of what we have on the back is this bit that says, is Ransom inspired by a transcendent truth or prey to a misguided fantasy? As his grip on reality weakens, the reader shares his fears, his hopes, and his extraordinary discoveries. So for me, what this is giving us in terms of Rich's intentions is we are meant to ask whether or not this is real or not, like as in Animus. But at the same time, his grip on reality is actually weakening. And at the same time as that, his discoveries are extraordinary. Like the framing of this sentence tells us that he is discovering something that is transcendently true. Whether or not that comes along with a loss of grip on material reality is up for debate, I think. But either way, like, the novel wants us to see him as having learned something that it matters.
Too much is working under the hood here. And maybe that's a weird confluence of Rich being completely misguided in his mission, but very skilled in his tools.
Yeah.
These two things are coalescing in a way that makes this completely baffling novel.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Like, he's really good at the tools of fiction, as in, like, the little, like, nuts and bolts of it, but, like, I don't think he understands or has a good sense of his own, like, personal practice in terms of, like, how fiction is used to, like, communicate meaning, if that makes sense. Meaning on, like, the thematic level, not on the level of, like, there are words that make sentences that make syntactic sense.
Yeah.
And I see what you're saying about, like, the dark comedy, because there are these moments where, like, things happen that are like really darkly funny, like them finding the pack after the storm being like right next to them and they're like, "Arr." But
he's right behind me, isn't he?
yeah, exactly. But
yeah,
at the
literally.
same time, I feel like the novel's message there is something more akin to like help was right there and you didn't see it.
Fate has saved us once again.
Yeah, Animus wanted us to endure this test and is now offering us respite. I don't know.
I have to mention, too, that it's after this moment where they both genuinely think that they are about to die. Well, first of all, he has another, like, comic book superhero moment where he, like, picks her up and saves her and, like, takes off all his clothes to, like, save her life and keep her warm and stuff. And it's really crazy. But it's immediately after this where he says that her love was a way station. And he says, maybe it was never human love I wanted. Essentially just, like, totally, absolutely annihilating their relationship immediately after they've, survived this, like, extremely traumatic event. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe it is supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
It is crushing to read, though, genuinely. I mean, it was, like, some of the moments of his, like, callousness and stuff are genuinely chilling.
It could absolutely be that, like, he is trying to be funny, but he doesn't understand, like, why using the tool of comedy there can create sort of, like, fraught or complicated readings, or, like, readings that are not what he's after.
Mm-hmm. Is it like the Joker, the 2019 Joker?
Yes.
Where he just doesn't understand why things are funny, and he just writes down car accidents funny, and doesn't understand it beyond that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Could totally be. Maybe he gets that, like, it's funny to have a scene where, like, these characters, like, wake up next to the help that they needed all night, and it's just right there. But he doesn't understand why using comedy there undercuts the seriousness of his message about, like, Ransom's discoveries of truth.
So, actually, ironically, I had a hard time articulating the bad things about this book, mostly because they are so buried in the DNA of this entire novel. But I wanted to call out kind of goes to the humor, the mishandling of very basic themes. And by mishandling, I mean, like, not that he's using them in a unstereotypical way, because, that could be good. But what I mean is, like, something I mentioned in the summary, the consistent conflation of love with death and or surrender. Why? What does this do? What does this mean about the narrative and or Rich? I don't have answers to this, and because I don't, I consider that a negative.
Mm-hmm. I do like that this novel has thematic aspirations. I feel like many of the books that we read for this show, like, don't get that far. But this one, like you're saying, absolutely mishandles them at every step.
I think that the ram and wolf dynamic is supposed to explain that for us. Like, I think that the relationship between love and fear, a bliss beyond fear. I think that the idea of, like, fear, bliss, sacrifice, love, self-sacrifice, brutality, like, all of this stuff is supposed to be wrapped up in the wolf-ram dynamic. But as Jay said, we have no sympathy for these wolves whatsoever. The ram is anthropomorphized in that we should understand that they feel this fear and they need to escape, and, like, they feel the way that we would feel about it, like this emotional tearing and, like, self-preservation, and, like, so we identify with the ram in that way. But the wolves are anthropomorphized just to be unambiguously evil. So it creates this idea where it's like, well, if love and fear are interlaced in this way, why is there a villain and a hero? Because the wolves, there's no sympathy for them, there's no real interest in why they are the way that they are. So if the ram is, like, in some sort of relationship with the wolves that is supposed to mirror human relationships or mirror the relationships of humans to Animus or whatever, it's ineffective because it's super straightforward. It just paints the wolves as evil. So there's nothing to really extrapolate from. There's no 300-page novel that can come out of that.
Yeah. And once again, my question is just going to be why? Movie Bob, Lindsay Ellis's best friend, once said, if you are going to break a toy in the toy box, you better have a good reason for doing so. What are we saying about love? Are we trying to say anything? Like, is this just some twisted reflection of our author's actual beliefs? There's got to be a reason.
There are times reading this novel where I think that it knows exactly what it wants to communicate, but it's just hard for, like, normal people, to access because it's so dark. We don't want to accept what it's saying, which seems to be that love is surrender, but not in the sense of like making yourself vulnerable, like Andrew and I were talking about earlier. Rather, love is surrender in the sense that like you become supplicant, subservient, subsumed into a greater force. Like you are dissolved.
Yeah, you are destroyed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we should want that. We should all want that for ourselves. Anything that prevents us from getting towards that, i.e. wolves, is unambiguously evil. It does not have free will. It is not an agent. It is just a force that exists to prevent, except for when we randomly decide that those forces are also, like, in some way forces of the good and that we sometimes need to struggle against them so that we can ultimately get to the good. It's like this weird, like, complicating or unnecessarily complicated, like, one track kind of view of life where like there is one answer, it is unambiguous, and it doesn't resonate for me personally at all, because I don't think any part of life is that simple or that unnuanced.
Jay, if I could go off script here and mention a text conversation where you told me that you think that this novel is the most evil novel that you've ever covered on the podcast, and that it is actually ontologically evil.
This novel is ontologically
I would love for
evil.
you to talk a little bit more about that.
I want to hear about that.
So it actually follows pretty closely on what I was just saying, so that was a great time to bring that up, thank you. So ultimately my issue with this novel, and the reason I think it's evil, is that what this novel proposes is a world in which there is one supreme subject, in the sense of like subject position. There is one active agent, an individual who actually matters. They are the main character of the universe, and all other universal characters can either choose to follow that agent's will, or they can be traitors. They can betray it at every turn and become wolves, be unambiguously, one note, monolithically evil. That active agent, that one universal subject, is Animus, which means it's also Ransom, because Ransom is the only one who can continually interact with Animus. He's the only one who, like, recognizes that there is Animus within him. He's the only one with the power to recognize Animus with other people. He's the only one that knows how to get to Animus. So thereby, he is like the Christ to the Animus's God. Like, they are separate, but they are also one and the same. Again, everybody else can either follow him, giving up their agency and doing exactly as he says at all times, or they can divert from that path, and at that point they become wolves, which are agents of destruction. They want only one thing, which is consumption and death, and that's it. Those are your two options. And so I think what the world that this novel proposes is an evil one, because there can be no agency in it, unless you're Ransom. And because we're not Ransom, it implies a world in which we don't really get to choose things.
And destruction is the only possible path, because it's like, oh, so you either submit to Animus and jump into the volcano and turn into fucking volcano dust, or you get eaten by wolves.
Yeah. That's an excellent point as well. Thank you for putting it that way. Like, even if you have agency, sort of, and you're a Ransom, the only correct choice is to then submit to an even higher power, which is, of course, Animus. It's very much like the Noah book in that way, where anytime you wanted to do something, you had to consult, like, the regional daddy. It was like, I want to do a thing in town. I need to consult town daddy. Oh, I need to talk to Or daddy. Like, no one can just do anything. They need permission from, like, a higher power that rolls up to a higher power and eventually to God.
He literally meets Ram Daddy.
Yeah.
The patriarch is the Ram Daddy.
And the patriarch is like, good job having sex with your wife.
Yeah, the male power.
This is, I don't know, this is kind of my straight edge rant, but that kind of goes into another theme that I thought was mishandled, which is overcoming. The novel consistently poses like, we are going to transcend the bounds of the natural world and not have children and not have a family, and love is bad, no attachments. But the overcoming is just throwing yourself into a new obsession. It's not transcendence. It is deciding that you have a new daddy now.
It's a lateral move.
It's a lateral daddy move. And that's crazy to me.
Me when I move laterally across daddies.
In an academic paper, I'm going to describe this as lateral daddy move, capital L, capital D, capital M.
Yeah.
Parentheses LDM.
LDM. Henceforth referred to as LDM.
And I think that's evil too. That's misleading at best, completely nefarious at worst.
Also, at the risk of sounding like a fedora-wearing Reddit atheist, I think that this novel's understanding of LSD is just frankly very silly and unfounded. This idea that by taking LSD, you enable the universe to communicate directly with you or in some way reveal itself to you is based on nothing. There is no evidence to suggest that whatsoever. I would be totally fine if that was a device in a book that didn't seem that we should take that claim literally, but this is a book in which, like, when you take acid, the universe, like, materially changes itself in some way, like the patterns rearrange so that you are able to read them, which I think is a kind of, like, self-centering way to view the world, that, like, it is creating patterns that are legible to you and only you because you're the specialist boy, and the acid is a conduit that makes that possible. I just find that really weird and disturbing, and as much as I do like the way that the acid trips themselves are described, what acid enables you to do in this book is, I think, harmful, potentially.
Nail on the head.
I find it so weird when people treat acid as a tool to, like, change the universe in a way, when, like, all it's really doing is enabling you to look at things from a different perspective. Nothing actually changed.
That's kind of what I mean by the transcendence thing. You're not getting over any natural thing. You're just getting dependent on a new chemical to feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
lateral daddy move.
Lateral daddy.
That's a classic textbook LDM.
You see it all the time.
Many people are saying this.
I want to bring things back down to, like, a more, like, you know, techniques of writing level. Oftentimes, and we saw this in Nova's playlist too recently, like, the main character's immediate and even long-term goal should be semi-clear, unless you're writing, like, an uber literary, like, To the Lighthouse type of novel where, like, other things are more important.
Well, that one's clear. They want to get to that damn lighthouse.
They do want to get to that goddamn lighthouse.
It takes them like 400 pages to do it.
You know what? By golly, they sure do it.
On the last page.
They sure get there.
This is like To the Lighthouse, but it's a volcano.
Oh, To the Volcano.
I'm sorry, go on.
There's a point, and it's, like, right around the time that Ransom first gets to the wilderness in order to gather samples and write his book, where I'm like, yes, I understand that, but, like, in order to do what? Like, what is his ultimate character goal? Where is his arc heading? I mean, I know it's heading to madness because, like, that's the only place a book like this could possibly go, but, like, the novel's not doing a good job of telling me, the reader, like, what I should be expecting in terms of, like, what he hopes to accomplish by finishing this novel. Is he trying to write, like, Bible 2? Because they already did that, and it's called the Mormon Bible. And I don't know if you noticed this, but, like, there's still non-Mormons and non-Bible readers, so that didn't really work. But yeah, I don't know, like, what he's really after, ultimately speaking.
A more immersive book where he can name more scientific names of plants and birds.
True. Where he can list off lichens.
Yeah.
Which he doesn't even seem to really care about that much by the end.
No.
He, like, doesn't... It seems like he just finishes his manuscript for Lindy. Like, he doesn't even care if other people, you know, find the book or want the book or publish the book. They even bring, at the Wild Animus cake party, they even bring a publisher there as a surprise who's interested in publishing the book, and he doesn't want to do it. So it doesn't actually seem... It's even more evil, actually, because if he has discovered this, like, insane, life-changing, ontological truth, he doesn't even want other people to access it unless they're directly involved with him, like someone like Skimmer.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that at all.
Yeah, it opens up such an even bigger question.
That's really fucking freaky.
Yeah.
And it makes it a really weird and meta that the book is called Wild Animus, too, as though extra textually it's implying that we are now disciples of Ransom by reading this book.
Right.
Dude, I am not a disciple of Ransom.
No.
I'm that one guy that like turned away, and, like, the novel framed as, like, a foolish, like, a secularist.
Yeah,
it's like,
genuinely. I have actually, though, talking about the obscurity of people's goals and even identities, one of my biggest qualms with the book is it has, for all of its flowery language, it has huge show don't tell issues.
Yes.
It tells us so much stuff without showing us, and it's very important details about characters that, like, totally shapes who they are and what they are in the text. I feel like I'm harping on this, but the biggest one is definitely Lindy. I mean, I would say for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We are constantly told that Lindy is evil or manipulative or an abuser, but she never actually acts that way.
Never.
So the text is constantly beating us over the head with this idea that Lindy is evil, but it's not showing us. Like, for instance, in the first section, after Sam punches Theo for being mean to Lindy, Lindy sarcastically says, "Nice friends." The text describes this.
Wait, is this the part where it says abuse had made
Yes!
her into an abuser?
Yes!
And I'm like,
Yes.
she just said something kind of snarky.
She said, "Nice friends." And the novel describes this as viciousness, as lashing out at him, says that she is punishing Sam. Even Lindy herself says, "That was hateful," while her eyes plead with him an apology. And even crazier, the book then asserts that, quote, abuse had turned her into an abuser, leaving her doubly shamed. So taking the fact that she was abused as a child and saying that that has turned her into such a horrible monster that she would snarkily say, "Nice friends," after Ransom punches one guy and literally breaks a bone in his face.
Yeah, in a different novel, I would definitely think that that's like deliberately cartoonish and asking us to like pay attention to like an unreliable narrator who's describing things this way.
No, I don't feel like there's really evidence in the text that it wants us to, like, push back against that or anything.
I think any instance where the text frames Ransom as having done harm is a little bit of like a trade-off. What's the phrase I'm looking for?
Concession?
Concession, thank you.
Nice.
It's like a little bit of a concession on Rich's part that, like, at times, because a main character can't always be right, like, a Ransom has to be shown as being wrong. But then the narrative, like, after having made that concession, will immediately turn back around and, like, revert the status quo to, like, actually, Ransom was correct. But
well, it's all part of his sacrifice.
Yeah. So, that's kind of how I'm reading those moments. I want to talk mechanically about the use of the word chant.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Please talk about the use of the word chant.
And sort of catty corner from that, the use of the word poem. Obviously, I have complex thoughts about that I don't feel like I need to fully outline right now. However, I will read one of Ransom's alleged chants.
Okay.
And we can decide for ourselves, sort of in this moment, whether we think that this is a chant. Surging through me, great strokes. Giant cakes cracking, the icefall smokes. Inside me, you roar. Down the cataracts pour. How would you chant that?
Like you did?
At one point it says, I think that he chants to the rhythm of ram hoofs running, which would be a pretty fast tempo.
Yeah, and it'd be like a ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. Yeah,
Surging
or like a
through
4.
me. Great. No, I don't know.
Yeah.
They're awful. They're very hard to read. They don't make any sense, and even in the narrative universe, they're very awkward. So not a big fan of them.
Yeah.
I thought there was more of a through line with him being in a band and him making chants. I thought it was like George R. R. Martin's Dream Songs kind of thing, but no, I don't think so. Maybe by chant he means like chant, like he's singing it. Have you guys listened to the album?
No.
No, the album. So the album is worse than the Rintong and Dorner album. I'm sorry, Elsiane, you're still one of the worst vocalists I've ever heard, but Rich Shapero is worse. Rich Shapero's vocals, they're not even bad. They're just completely mismatched to the song that's being played in the backtrack. And he kind of goes, "The fire's burning, my guts are churning." So it's like, it's very clipped and it's very, I don't know what you would call it, asynchronous with this like jig that's playing in the background. So that's kind of what I interpret it as.
Do you know if it's Rich?
He's credited as the vocalist.
It better be, because if this is a guest artist, like you paid too much, Rich.
Turning back to the chants themselves really quickly, I think so, like, the reason that they don't work as chants is because the lines are all different lengths in terms of, like, the number of stressed and unstressed beats without getting too into the terminology. And at the same time, they are different kinds of lyric feet. So there's, like iams, trochees, dactyls, anapests, that kind of thing. So not only are there different numbers of them, but there's different arrangements of those different kinds. So, like, it would be impossible to chant this in, like, a consistent way, especially along to the rhythm of a ram moving, which would be consistent. At the same time, Andrew, a second ago, something you were saying made me realize that, like, yeah, these also feel, like, weirdly external to the text. They don't give us any imagery that we don't already get elsewhere, and in the few instances that they do, it's not very good or very striking, and it doesn't seem to add anything to the metaphor systems, image systems already in play.
Mm-hmm.
So you could really cut them and lose nothing. You could honestly just say, like, he was chanting, and I would just assume he was doing, like, some kind of wordless rhythmic chant, and I would be okay with that, personally.
Yeah, like yoiking as a Finnish shaman or something. Yeah, it's one of those things that could be told better than shown.
Yeah, it's strange too. I mean, the reason that they don't seem like chants to me is that every single chant is this little short 4-line thing that it seems like he doesn't repeat multiple times. It seems like he just says it once.
There's no refrain.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, how is that a chant? He's just saying something.
He's just saying something.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're not even quatrains. Sometimes they're trochees, sometimes they're tercets, sometimes they're couplets.
Oh, I didn't even realize that. They are very hard to read. I mean, it's difficult to even explain. Like, I don't know, it feels like word salad at times.
Sometimes the rhyme scheme changes, or like there isn't fully one. They're just very weird. Unnecessary. Just flatly unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
Novel. Oh, also, oh my gosh, it's totally worth mentioning that all of the chants are in bold italics, but just like interspersed throughout the text.
Yes.
So you could read this book without any of the bold italic sections, whether it's the long, drawn-out wolf sections or the little chant sections, and it would be 100% identical. You wouldn't lose anything.
I feel like in part 2, because the hangbelly dies in a bold italic section, the symbolism of that might be lost.
That's a good point,
But
actually.
in terms of like most of like surface level action occurring,
I forgot that Hangbelly died in one of those sections. Isn't she back later, though? Isn't
I
she
think
there
she
when
comes-
they jump into the volcano?
She's mentioned
she's-
a lot.
maybe as like a ghost.
Oh, okay, ghost wolf.
I don't know anything about the wolves.
I don't know.
The wolves are bad too.
We know that they're real because at one point one of the scientists mentions like having seen 7 wolves from a
Totally.
helicopter.
Mhm.
Totally.
But then I think you're right. I think the Hangbelly does come back. So it's like, I don't know. Maybe they're not real that time.
Yeah, multiple of them die, actually, I think.
Yeah.
I think several die after the Hangbelly, and then I think they are all there at the end. So that's kind of interesting.
But not Lindy.
Yeah, but not Lindy, who is the... Please, can we get into another complaint? Which is that...
Have we stopped?
So not only does Ransom decide that Lindy is a pack of wolves, she is the pack of wolves that has been following him and attacking him brutally.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 7 wolves. There's 7 points on Lindy's scar, the star-shaped scar that's mentioned in the prologue. And so each side of her is represented by the character of the wolves. And it is so grating to read because basically every interaction between them after Ransom decides this, every 2 seconds after she says something, it's like Ransom knew that it was the wise who was looking at him in the eye, but the rough was turning her head away, scared. Hangbelly glared at him with anger, but Lead was there, or whatever. Like, I mean, it's just so grating.
And it's like another way that her agency is like reduced
Yes.
to kind of like animal instinct in a way. It's like she's not a person, she's a collection of like 7 traits, and every time he interacts with her, they flip coins to see which one is going to be in charge in that moment. She stops like having free will, kind of. She's like under the control of these evil forces. And the way that he consistently just like invokes them every time she does something is so repetitive.
Right.
This argument with them, it's like the peak of this argument. His eyes searched hers, and he says, "Only the wise understands." And she says, "I love you." And he says, "The Lead still hungers for me." And then she shudders and says, "Don't." And he goes, "The younger's trembling with fear." And it's just this for like line after line after line.
Yeah.
He goes through all 7 every time.
So insulting, too.
It is so insulting.
To be like, you're not you. You're like these other things I've reduced you to in my mind.
Literally dehumanizing.
Mm-hmm.
These other things that I have named and identified, separate of you.
Shit,
these
I
wolves
made
that you essentially never encounter. Yeah.
Yeah, dehumanizing Andrew also, but like the specific way it's dehumanizing feels counterproductive for the novel, because for a book that like seems to want to have empathy for animals, to reduce a person to an animal suggests that an animal is a thing to which a person can be reduced, which creates a hierarchy, which is so weird, because like, isn't this novel about empathy for animals, at least in some way? I mean, Isn't it on your copy, Red, that says, like, proceeds from the novel will be donated to some kind of Alaskan wildlife fund?
Yeah, it says all proceeds from the sale of this book will be dedicated to the conservation of strategic wilderness lands in Alaska, which is super cool.
Wow.
Great.
And I hope that is true, and I hope that's still going on.
Makes me wish I had bought my copy from him and not from used.
Genuinely.
Yeah.
I do want to have our readers guess, though, because on the back of my advanced reading copy, it also discloses the marketing budget for this novel. So actually, Andrew and Jay, I think y'all should both guess the amount of money that you think was spent on marketing this novel, and readers at home have a number in your head too.
My guess is $50,000. He has a lot of money to throw around, and it is not cheap to hire armies of people to travel to college campuses.
55,000. Just because I want to say a bigger number than Andrew.
Hold on to your seats, y'all.
No.
$450,000.
Bullshit.
Book that nobody ever read.
$450,000.
Where did that money go? I never saw an ad for this book.
Me neither. I've never heard of it except for his disciples passing them out at Willow College.
Dude, that was Skimmer.
That was Skimmer.
You met Skimmer. You
that
didn't
was
even
Skimmer.
know it.
Oh my god.
Wow.
Imagine what we could do for this podcast with that kind of money.
That did literally suck the air out of the room. I'm sorry. It's depressing.
Hey, Rich, our coffee is open if you want to give us $400,000. Clearly, you could throw it around.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Please.
You've given it to less meaningful, less impactful ventures. So,
oh well.
Might as well. I have one animal qualm that I foreshadowed earlier that I almost forgot. So the book for a little while is randomly interested in magpies and the way that they follow wolves around, but also sometimes lead wolves to injured animals. As far as I know, this is actually true, or at least like reportedly true, maybe in like a folk wisdom-y kind of way. The novel like pretends that they're going to be symbolically relevant since they're animals running around with these other symbolically relevant animals, but then it like loses interest in that, I guess. In the meantime, though, there is another thing that it says about magpies that is not actually true. Let me find it in my book real quick. So this is in the letter that he gets from Catherine Gates after he returns from his month-long trip into the wilds. Catherine, an ornithologist, says, in response to your question about magpies, yes, we regularly find them at high elevations in the mountains. True. That's where they nest. False. Your tape has gotten a lot of listening, especially the Golden Crown's 5-note song. Okay, so with regards to the magpies and them nesting up in the mountains of Alaska, that is inaccurate. According to the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, magpies during their nesting season actually fly further inland into Canada where they nest. So they don't nest up in the Wrangles, according to that government source. So I don't know what's going on with that. Bird migration and habits do change, especially with like climate change happening. So it's possible that like that information that I found is outdated or that Rich's was. But, you know, these two sources are not in alignment on that, and I think it's really weird that there's two instances of, like, purported animal experts in the book, like, saying pseudoscience about animals.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jay, she is a woman scientist.
Red!
She knows struggle in a way that only Ransom can understand.
Oh my god, true. You know, I shouldn't criticize her. She doesn't deserve it. Actually, unironically, though, she doesn't.
I just know that Rich felt like RBG reincarnate writing that section where she stands up and is like, I am a woman, and I understand.
Dude, that shit was so embarrassing. It was embarrassing
really
to read.
Yeah.
It was embarrassing to read.
I was, like, kind of sitting there, like, in my own home, like, cringing, like, hoping no one was looking over my shoulder. As if, even if they did, they would know what I was reading. But I was like, ooh.
It gave me a fever, actually, I think. It gave me, like I got, like, a foodborne illness
or was
kind
that
of effect from
the molten
text.
heart stirring within you?
My sweet child, you've surrendered. I'm here, melting you into me, taking you back. You drown in my roar, screaming and weeping, laughing inside me as you bobble and flow. All of you, down to that knotted heart, that glowing worm. I gave you life. I'm the blood of the cosmos, the boost everything craves. Detonations, exclamations, my deafening roar. I am your center, your deepest feeling, the headwaters of your yearning heart. I am Animus, fresh and glowing, foaming and flaming, dissolving and growing, fire to matter, the batter of bliss. What mortal dream, stranded, winking its last, arcing and coasting down and down, could be more than this? Doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything. You did a great job reading it, though.
Yeah. All those years of quoting Xavier Renegade Angel have paid off.
Before we head out, we have to discuss how we're going to fix this book, guys. I just feel like we can't just shit on Rich, as easy as it is to do, and leave him. We got to give him something to go off of. Do you guys have anything? I have one little idea that he's not going to want to hear. So.
I have a high-level conceptual thing that I would consider number one priority, which is something we've already basically said. We need to know what we're supposed to think about Ransom's opinions.
Totally.
Is the narrative itself in alignment with him? Or is it against him, or ideally somewhere in between? But we have to know that.
Yeah, make it a little bit like more idiot-proof, I guess.
Yeah, Rich, even if you think we're stupid, which maybe we all are, or maybe we're all overeducated college liberals, but either way, if you want people to read this stuff, you gotta make it readable.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Andrew, I'm wondering if my critique is the same as yours, and it's gonna be something that Rich does not want to hear, but, like, he knows how to write a novel. This is obviously someone who understands novels. This is someone who understands fiction. It's someone who has an extensive vocabulary, someone who knows how to write a book. I can go on and on about this. It's a rare skill, and a lot of these skills I can see it's taken a very long time to hone. I mean, he's written a ton of books, which is super impressive, but he needs other people. I mean, he has to have a team around him in some capacity just because there are so many impressive things about the book that are so clean that would be very hard for one person to do.
Sure.
But he has to have just surrounded himself with, like, yes men, because there are too many crazy ass things going on in this book that someone, I'm sure he faced critique at some point that was like, you need to change this, you need to change that. Like Jay is saying, I think that the plot is intentionally super ambiguous because, again, Shapero loves to do these, like, crazy, psychedelic, you don't know what's real, you don't know what isn't real, everything is so nebulous and bizarre, and, like, I think it might be intentional that we don't get a clear read on Ransom, and I feel like there just needs to be someone there being like, listen, you're not going to be able to pull this off, you know?
I mean, this ultimately, like, on the fundamental level, a novel exists to communicate some kind of information or meaning, and if it's not doing that, then it's not working.
It's not a novel.
Whether or not that's because Rich Shapero is the most giga-brain genius who's ever lived, or because he's just not succeeding, either way, books exist to communicate things to people. If people don't feel that the book has communicated to them, it's the book that has to change.
Yeah. The book has to change. This popped into my head. This is probably completely too much for Rich to consider, but this would work really well as like a schlock horror psychological thriller thing. You know, like one of those Tusk or Human Centipede.
I was thinking Tusk.
Yeah, like where the transformation into the ram is a little bit slower and played more for horror. I mean, the constituent parts are there, but like I don't know. I think that could be a fun direction to take this in, where it's a little bit more unambiguous, where all this stuff is bad, but like it could be overtaken by this ram fursuit that calls to him and tells him to meet God in a volcano. I don't know.
It would also be a great opportunity to strip away a lot of the like extraneous thematic stuff that's honestly like very misogynistic and though those are two separate categories. There's the misogynistic stuff, and then there's the stuff that's just simply distracting. A schlock horror thriller angle that has sort of a loose theme about like, don't be consumed by your passions, like, is so much more attainable. And probably a better read than this, which is maybe a little disappointing, because I would prefer that this novel have something very grand and sweeping and interesting to say, as long as it's something good.
Yeah.
Part of me thinks that if you wanted to take the literary route, which, knowing Rich Shapero as well as we know him, I think he definitely does, I think there are more interesting perspectives that we could have in the novel other than just following Ransom around. Especially if we're not actually going to know how we should feel about Ransom. I think if the novel was more from Lindy's perspective, because that's an interesting story. This girl who meets a random man, moves in with him within a week, moves to Seattle within like a month or whatever. They totally run away from their life. She's working these jobs to give him a ton of drugs, give him all this climbing gear. They go to Alaska. Like, she's watching him slip away. That could be such, she's calling her friends and they're like, oh, how are you? We haven't seen you in a while. And she's like, oh, by the way, my boyfriend changed my name, so you should call me this now. And seeing their reactions to that, like, that could be such an interesting angle. It could also be interesting even if the novel was, I don't know how we could fill in the other, like, background sections, but even if the novel was, like, from Doug's perspective, or, like, one of the scientists who, like, knows so much more about the landscape, and this random guy rolls up with, like, a crazy look in his eye and a fursuit, and these people are, like, just watching him go through this bizarre experience.
Exactly.
And if Shapero wants us to have some distance away from whether Ransom is sane or not, having the novel, orbit another character would give us that ambiguity, and it would give room for the novel to stretch into that question and be like, is this guy crazy or is he kind of cool? I kind of rock with this guy. Like, he's got a cool vibe, or to be like, oh, whoa, he's such a freak, and that could be really interesting.
I don't think you're going to want to do it though, Rich, because it's not as literary or ambiguous. I don't know.
It doesn't give him the opportunity to, like, quote unquote, explore the tortured mind of an outcast artist, which I think is what he wants. Like, clearly he wants a story in which the main guy is, like, outcast and oppressed, because that's a consistent part of it, is, like, people betraying him, quote unquote, and him having to self-isolate so that he can focus on his work even as no one understands him. Like, he has to be the most specialist, and that's going to be harder to make seem believable. Not that he's done it, but it would be harder through the eyes of someone who he is actively abusing.
Right.
Anything else?
That's all I got. I don't think there's a lot helping this guy.
I just can't get over how interesting of a character Lindy could be. And I'm even cool with her being evil. Like, if we want her to be this symbol of, like, an ontological cosmic evil that Ransom is battling with, lean into that. Make her bad, Like, give us a scene of her destroying the fursuit and, like, Rich uncovering it and it literally feeling like she's ripping him limb from limb and he has to reconstruct it painstakingly. Like, give us something, and give us her sabotaging the plane so it can't take off or something, like, give us her sneaking raw meat into his bag so that the wolves are more inclined to attack him. Like, there's so many more. If we want an evil Lindy, make an evil Lindy. But all that we have in this book is a tortured young girl who's being manipulated and abused by this bizarre, cruel man. And that could also be a super interesting story, again, if we see it more from the side of, like, those people around Lindy watching this bizarre, I keep saying that word, it's the only thing that comes to mind with this book.
Me too.
Watching her life be be transformed from the outside in just total horror. There's so much opportunity there, but unfortunately I feel like the text itself just isn't interested enough in Lindy at all.
No.
I love this idea, especially of her putting meat inside his pack so that the wolves chase him, because that also creates, like, a more direct link between her actions and the wolves attacking him.
We need that.
That's really
so bad.
Brilliant. I like that a lot. So much better than, like, one day Ransom decided that the wolves and her were the same.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay.
Sure. Yeah.
It's free to decide things.
Yeah. Well, we did our best.
Ransom turns to her. Catherine? At first, she didn't respond. She seems to sense what an act of courage it was for him to share these ideas. Normally, she would have remained aloof, but she wasn't her normal self that night. She was at a crossroads.
I'm a woman fighting for a place in a man's world,
she said, looking up, speaking stiffly to the group.
I've battled in the field and in faculty committees and proven I'm man enough for both.
She faced Ransom, regret softening her defiance.
I thought that was what I wanted, but it's not.
Hank sighed.
I'm unmarried and childless.
Catherine said.
Not even the birds give me joy.
She gazed before her, at no one.
Their freedom reminds me of what I hoped for, and how short I've fallen.
The tenor of the dinner party changed dramatically. Ransom gazed around the table.
How does a woman stay young at heart?
She wondered softly.
Maybe she has to sit on a nest.
Gag.
Literature.
Literature, capital L. Women's empowerment.
Well, guys, we definitely had our work cut out for us today. Rich, just as a final note to you, I think it might be worth considering why these extra cosmic supernatural entities that are consistently getting in the way of your male visionaries always have to be female companions turned villains. But that's something you can work on your own time.
Maybe in therapy.
Maybe with a therapist or a priest or a ram alone in the woods. Whatever you need to make that happen. Hey, if you're looking to get in touch, you can hop on our Discord server. You can reach us on Twitter or on Instagram, both at SBU_English Club. You can check out our website at English Club Podcast, where if you're feeling generous, you can toss us a couple bucks over on Ko-Fi or Coffee. Is it Coffee, Andrew?
I call it coffee. I don't know.
Okay. On Coffee or on PayPal. Check out our YouTube channel where we have all kinds of little video essays dropping periodically. And shoot us an email at
EnglishClubPodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, please hit us up with questions, comments, thoughts, book recommendations. We haven't done it yet, but I would love at some point to do like a mailbag episode or a mailbag segment. So please do send us questions. We've got a few in the backlog, but I don't know if we have enough to fill up a full episode at this point or to read that. We've read a few on stream, but yeah, it'd be great to work them into an episode at some point. So feel free to hit us up anytime. That aside, we appreciate everybody making it out to club today. Thanks to Benjamin Davis for the music for this episode. Sorry we haven't thanked you in like a year and a half, but we still appreciate your piano interludes. They do great work for us over here. Thank you, Red, for stopping by and being a wonderful guest on this episode.
Yeah.
And for contributing so many great thoughts to this.
Thank you. I had a blast.
With that, I've been Jay.
I've been Andrew.
And we'll see you around campus.